Welcome to Haunting Whispers. Tonight, as the rain falls softly, we'll share some true scary stories to help you relax and fall asleep. And comment where are you watching from and the time are watching this video. Ever wondered what happens when darkness falls and the rain starts? Stay with us to find out in tonight's chilling stories. Let the gentle rain and these chilling tales carry you off to sleep. Sweet dreams. I found recordings of a missing archaeology team. I don't post things often, but I discovered something quite unusual and frankly quite terrifying the other day. I'm not sure how else to put it, but I haven't been able to think about anything else. I was hoping someone could help me make heads or tails of it. A little background first. I'm an assistant curator at a pretty famous museum. I won't say which, as I would like to maintain my anonymity. All you need to know is that we have an unbelievably large archive of artifacts, art, and research. It takes a lot of manpower to organize, manage, and digitize them. Anyways, I was going through boxes of records from field teams the other day, and I came across a satellite communication device. It's just an audio recording device that lets field teams who probably don't have internet where they work to record logs on what they find. This isn't anything out of the ordinary for me. I do, however, absolutely hate coming across them, as it was my job to transcribe the hours of recordings on these devices. I love my work, but every job has its tedious duties. Thankfully, when I opened the files, there were only 22 logs. I should mention that the device that I have is not the original recorder the team had with them, but is only a receiver. We don't receive the recordings in real time, as it takes an exhaustingly long time for any data to be transferred between these devices over great distance. It is, however, a reliable way to keep records. Usually the team would arrive home before their recordings do. This is only done as a precaution if the original device is lost. The other files, along with the satellite device, included information on the research team and other files pertaining to their mission. I won't be specific, but the team was sent to the outskirts of Jordan to investigate a previously undiscovered Mesopotamian ruin. Anyways, I'm just going to put the finished transcriptions here for you guys. I'll be adding additional notes of what I think I hear in the background. The names of those involved have been changed. I hope you understand. Date and time listed are in DDYYYHS format. The following logs were received in September of 2020. Log 1. Hey, what's up, guys? Just casually making history out here. Or uncovering it, I suppose. Milo, put that down. It's not a toy. Just having a bit of fun. Alright, gotta go. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe. Milo. End of Log 1. Log 2. It sounds like it's raining heavily in the background. How does this thing work? Just hit that button on the top. There's like 4 buttons on the top. Is the red light on? Yep. Then it's working. Oh. Okay. Progress here is slow. Well, we haven't even begun to investigate the site yet. A massive freak storm hit us the moment we got here, and we've just been waiting it out. That's it, right? Yeah, that's all for now. Looks like we're going to be waiting a while. Milo. Oh shit. Milo's comment is immediately followed by the sound of thunder. End of Log 2. Log 3. Let me tell them. No, I'm the team leader here, so I get to tell them. You won't say it with gravitas. Come on, go. We've got things to prep. This is momentous, Carter. Bob and Milo's voices and footsteps die down. All right, you would not believe our luck. So the storm has passed, but a lightning bolt last night struck the site. There's a massive crater, yes, but don't worry, it gets good. It opened up an untouched tunnel system under the site. We found it earlier today, and by the looks of it, we think it's man-made. Can't be sure yet. We're going in to investigate tomorrow. We won't go in too far. However old it is, I doubt its architectural integrity. Don't have much to report right now. Hopefully, I'll have more tomorrow. Don't want to get my hopes up, but we might be standing on something huge. Maybe Milo was right about me lacking gravitas. End of Log 3. Log 4. Milo and Bob can be heard yelling in the background at the start of the recording, although I can't make out what they're saying. Everyone's voices in this log are noticeably echoing. It's exactly what we had hoped, and maybe more. We're at the tunnel system right now, and there are carvings and symbols all over the walls. I don't recognize what culture they belong to, but it definitely isn't Mesopotamian. The architecture doesn't match any of the ruins above. It doesn't look like any ancient language we have records of. This might actually be something new. You hear that? We might have found a new ancient civilization. This changes the entire timeline of human history. This could be fucking Atlantis for all we know. Carter, John, footsteps gradually grow louder in the background. We found a door. Holy foo. End of log 4. Log 5. Can't we just grab a few sticks of dynamite? We did pack some after all. No, you idiot. You want to destroy priceless artifacts and bring this entire tunnel down on us? One stick of dynamite. Guys, shut up. Okay, we're at the end of the tunnel system. It's about 300 meters from the opening we came in from. I know I said we won't go in that far, but this is really exciting. Anyways, we found a door? More like a wall, honestly. Looks angry too. It's a massive flat circular rock that's blocking the tunnel. There's a face carved on it. Milo got some photos, so I won't bother trying to describe it. John's right though, it does look quite ferocious and ugly. We're documenting everything here. Don't worry. End of log 5. I didn't find any of the photos they described among the files. Log 6. Quite the day we had. God, I still can't believe how lucky we got. This is incredible. We'll go investigate further tomorrow, but we're gonna have to wait for a larger team to arrive. We don't have the manpower or the equipment to handle something of this magnitude. Some of us want to force our way through, and as exciting as that sounds, every brick and stone in that tunnel are considered artifacts and evidence of this civilization. Can't have them damaged. Maybe if we pry it open somehow. Just thinking out loud. There's yelling in the background. What are they doing now? End of log 6. Log 7. Log 7. Give me that. Hang on. Just run me through what happened again. Milo and I were bringing back the equipment we left near the tunnel. Right? And a man came stumbling out of the tunnel system, yelling at us. What do you mean he came out of the tunnel? Well, Milo saw him first, but we watched him crawl out of the tunnel. There's nothing in the tunnel. It's a straight shot to the dead end. Yeah, I know that. I'm just telling you what I saw. Did he come from the direction of where the tunnel is, or did he actually... Carter, I'm fucking telling you he came out of the tunnel. I don't know. Maybe there's another opening we missed. You said he was yelling? Yeah. Well, I don't know. I turned my hearing aids off because Milo was being annoying. Milo heard it, though. Milo? Yeah? What was the man saying? I don't know. I didn't understand it. And where is this man now? I don't know. He's just gone. Into thin air? Well, there's not a whole lot of places to hide out here, so yeah, maybe. Didn't get a good look at him. Milo, tell him. Milo? Where's Milo? End of log 7. Log 8. Oh, 5:30 tomorrow. Alright, we're all back at camp. Milo's not feeling that well right now. Hopefully he gets better in the morning. I still want to go back to that tunnel tomorrow. Maybe see if that door would budge. What happened out there? Milo is really shaken up. I don't know. They said they saw a man coming out of the tunnel. What? You think this is another one of Milo's antics? I'm not sure about that. Have you seen the state he's in? Besides, didn't John say he saw the man too? Yeah. What do we do? There's nothing to do except our job. How do you delete recordings on this anyway? You're asking the wrong person. End of log 8. Log 9. Though 5/14/2019. I don't know how, but the doors opened. I was bringing our equipment for today's excursion, and there it was. The circular stone face had been rolled aside. Still can't really believe it. I'm gonna go get the others to take a look inside. Gonna need to bring some headlights. This is big. I can feel it. End of log 9. Log 10. Once again, everyone's voice is echoing. This whole thing must be massive. Be careful. Nobody touch a thing. John's right. We're just here to observe for now. Milo, hand me the lamp. I've got a bad feeling about this place. Yeah, especially what we saw yesterday. Enough of that. Carter, bring the light here. Yep. How far down does that go? Can't even see the bottom. I suppose these carvings would tell us something. Bob, didn't you take a course on philology? They can't teach me a language that was previously undiscovered, can they? Fair enough. Wish we could read some of these. Still have no idea what this structure is. We need to get as many photos as possible of their language if we're ever going to hope to reconstruct it. Milo, come take a picture of this one. This one's bigger, kinda like a banner. Must be important. Could be the name of this place. Milo's voice can be heard mumbling something, but I can't make out what he said. What was that? End of log 10, log 11, live 1420 air down. We're gonna go deeper into the underground structure. There's a set of staircases leading downward. No idea how big this structure is. Heading back to camp right now to grab some more torches. Bit concerned about breathing in the air down there. Might bring some face masks along. It'll probably be fine. Oh shit, there's a muffled sound here and a soft thud. I'm thinking Carter might have dropped the recorder. What in the world? More muffling and loud smacking. Probably Carter wiping sand off the microphone. Holy crap, no way. End of log 11, log 12, 5/14/20. Back at camp right now. Tripped over this robe on my way back just outside the tunnel. It was covered in a bit of sand. Smells terrible though. No idea how I missed it the first few days. Anyways, I may be reaching here, but it looks old, and maybe it belonged to the people of this ancient civilization. Might also just be something the locals left behind. Yeah, it probably is. Where did you find that? What? Oh, I found it on my way back. That's what he was wearing, the man I told you about. This again? I don't know how Milo talked you into this. He didn't. I can understand not believing him. But when have I ever lied to you? You expect me to believe that some guy out here in the middle of the desert crawled out of the tunnel that has no other openings besides the crater that was made 2 days ago. Carter? Not only that, but he just disappears. Into thin air, according to you. I didn't say that. This is the last time I want to hear about this man, all right? I saw what I saw. End of log 12. Log 13. Everyone's voices are echoing and muffled. It is really dark down here. Smells god-awful, too. Yeah, good thing I brought the face masks, right? I don't think it's helping. We should bring some of the floodlights in here next. I think those would blind us. I can turn down the intensity. I mean, we had no idea we would be working underground. We're not exactly prepared for it. All right, we'll get the floodlights later. Why do you always have that thing on? I just have it on when we're about to find something new. So I can give live commentary, what we're seeing. Well, so far, it's just more carvings along the wall down this way. Man, these people had terrible handwriting. Looks like we're coming up to the bottom. God, the smell is definitely getting stronger. Whatever it is, it's probably in there. We've reached the bottom of the staircase. There's a short stretch of hallway leading to an open doorway. Let's go check it out. Milo, get the camera ready. Where's Milo? Milo! A deafening explosion goes off, followed by the sound of stones collapsing. Don't tell me that's what I think it is. Better. Shit. End of log 13. Log 14, 15. Bob and John are heard yelling in the background. I can only make out a few words, and most of them are profanities. I think I can hear Milo crying. Carter starts coughing. Fuck. Milo just blew up our only exit. We're completely caved in. Try to dig our way out. But if we can't, we're gonna have to find another exit. There's got to be another way out. Fuck. Fucking damn it. There's a loud pounding echo as Carter punches a wall. Then there's stomping footsteps. John, Bob, and Milo's voices grow louder. Milo, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Carter, wait, let's... Bye. What the fuck were you thinking? The audio here is muffled. The microphone must have been shaking a lot. I can make out the sound of violent punching and Milo's screams. John, Carter, stop. That's enough. More muffled noises and the rustling sound of clothes. Screaming and hitting sound stops. Relief team arrives in 3 days. We'll run out of oxygen long before then. If we don't find a way out of here, you've effectively killed us. Please stop. I'm so sorry. Please, I'm so sorry. End of log 14. Log 15. It was the bodies. The smell. God, there's so many down here. Someone can be heard throwing up in the background. They're wearing the same robe. Carter, they... End of log 15, log 16. Someone is sobbing in the background. I can't discern who. There is also the sound of rock clattering on a hard surface. We're in the main room right now with the collapsed tunnel. John's trying to dig our way out right now, but it's not looking like a viable plan. That explosion earlier destroyed most of what was in this room. This whole structure might collapse on us even. I think straight. We think this place is a mass grave. The other room down the stairs, it was filled with long, decayed bodies. How things are looking, well, we might be adding to the pile. Hey, what's your problem? What? Hey, knock it off. There's some shuffling sound. No, you can't. We can't leave. We can't leave. What the fuck has gotten into you, Milo? If you want to die down here, be my guest. But I'm not letting you take the rear. You take the rest of us down with you. No, stop. Make him stop. Make him stop. Milo's begging is cut short by a grunt from Carter, followed by the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Carter, stay out of our way. Pull yourself together. We're not dying here. The sobbing gradually dies down to a whimper. I won't let you. You can't make me. There's a rhythmic, dull thudding sound followed by grunts of pain after each thud. You can't make me. Milo strains his word. Each word is followed by a thud. What the fuck? Carter, stop him. What do you want me to do? Clearly lost it. God's sake, Milo, stop. Milo, you're bleeding. Stop. Damn it. Milo, there's a shuffling sound followed by fast footsteps echoing. Where are you going? Milo, get back here. Footsteps quickly get farther away, although their echoes can still be heard. We're not going to go after him? I'm not going down there again. Plus, it's a dead end. Not like he can get too far from us. He can rot with the others down there for all I care. Sobbing resumes to its initial volume. End of log 16. Log 17. 14. We've been down here for, almost 8 hours now. Getting unbearably hot. The smell isn't helping either. It's gotten a lot stronger, even up here. Probably because the only ventilation we had collapsed. We're taking a break from digging our way out. Progress is slow. I'm going down there. Just leave him. I'm gonna go see if there's another way out. All right, yell if you find something. Yeah. And check on him. Yeah. Soft footsteps gradually dissipated until there was only silence. Silence went on for 7 whole minutes. I assumed Carter had forgotten to switch the device off. Ab, are you all right? We're gonna die down here. Another 4 minutes of silence follows. Milo, no. Carter, get down here, now. John's voice is echoing and hard to hear, but he is clearly yelling. Shit. Bob, come on. A single set of loud footsteps on stone floors and the shuffling of fabric is heard. Damn it, Bob. John and Milo's yelling gradually gets louder. Milo put the knife down. What the fuck is going on? You said, he lost it? He lost it. Milo, where did you get that? He demands. He keeps demanding. You better start making some sense. Milo starts crying loudly. He talks, choking through the sobs. He's in my head, Carter. He won't leave me alone. Though. No, I can't. That's what he wants. We can't let him leave. He's angry. He's so angry. They trapped him down here. He's so scared of rotting down here like the rest of us. What has been going on with you? Who are you talking about? John, the man from the tunnels. He told me his name. Ever since then, he's been in my head. The man from the tunnels is in your head? No, not him. Not a man. It is in my head. It was in his head and now it's in mine. He wasn't strong enough. Oh, but how it made him suffer. To have to die for so long. Milo's sobbing intensifies. Get a hold of yourself. Be specific. Tell me what did this to you. I can't. I can't. Please, that's what it wants. It'll make you suffer for it. I'm so sorry. I couldn't let it. We can't let it. Milo. The sound of ripping flesh followed Milo's blood-curdling scream. There is a loud, gelatinous splat, then a thick dripping sounds of liquid gushing onto the floor. Milo. Stop. It dies with me. I'll kill it. Bob. Bring the first aid kit. Bob. End of log 17. Log 18. 15:20. A faint whimpering can be heard in the background. Milo found a ritualistic dagger amongst the bodies. He's hurt really bad. Give it a rest, will you? I'm just doing my job. Your job? Your job? You fucking... Guys, stop. The audio devolves to just shuffling noises of fabric against the mic. End of log 18. Log 19. I think I'm starting to get used to the smell down here. I don't think it's actually a mass grave. The bodies aren't piled together or organized at all. I think it's a temple or church of some kind. There's an altar right there at the center of the room. There's art on the wall. And the statues. Looks like it's the god they were worshiping. Same face as the one on the door we found yesterday. I took photos, but the visibility isn't great down here. So maybe we could... What am I doing? No one's gonna find? Carter starts quietly crying. He resumes talking after a few minutes. So, we only really have access to the two rooms. The main room upstairs and down here. Everyone else is upstairs. Milo is... He's hanging in there. I don't even know how he's still alive. Christ, there's still pieces of him on the floor. I don't know what to do. Carter trails off and there's a minute of silence. I think I hear air. There's an opening somewhere here. The audio goes silent. Recorder doesn't pick up any sound for a few seconds. Then an almost negligible audio is picked up. It sounded like breathing. Carter, what the? Carter starts screaming. The sound of his heavy footsteps pounding on stone steps echoes. No, fuck no. Carter? John's voice is cut off by the loud sound of stones scraping and clattering onto the floor. Help me. We have to get out of here. Now. Suddenly, the rapid, heavy thud of footsteps closes in, growing louder until, with a deep, resonant thud, the sound of a body colliding with another fills the air. There's a sharp, forced exhale followed by a muffled thump, accompanied by scattering pebbles. John? I'm sorry. Milo is right. What? Told me its name. Put that away. What do you think you're doing? The harsh sound of labored breathing and strained grunts from both Carter and John. There's the occasional sharp scrape of a metallic object against stone. I'm doing you a kindness. Bob, get him off me. I'm so sorry. Bob, please. Bob, you know better. We can't. The struggle is suddenly interrupted by a swift, solid crack as a rock strikes the assailant. There's a sharp, surprised grunt as a dull thud of a body hitting the ground, followed by the clattering of metal. Took you long enough. What the fuck happened? I was only gone for a few hours. The clattering of rocks being thrown continues again. Come on, let's get out of here. Bob, the body's down there. I know, isn't it wonderful? Actual miracles sealed down here. This really is the discovery of the century. How lucky I am to not only witness it, but share it with the world. Not you two. This place is cursed. There are monsters down there. Not monsters. Devout worshippers. Don't be afraid, Carter. He bears gifts for us. Isn't that right, John? There's a low groaning sound in response. End of log 19, log 20. A steady beat of stone clattering onto the floor continues from the previous recording, although slower. It is accompanied by the sound of labored panting. It's been almost 24 hours since we've been down here. Supplies are getting low, but we'll make it to when the relief team arrives. Milo and John are in critical need of medical attention. There's only so much I can do for them with what I have on hand. The corpses in the lower levels aren't. Carter pauses for a few seconds before continuing. We seem to be experiencing some kind of mass hysteria. No one seems to be in the right state of mind down here in the dark. We had to restrain John for the time being. For his and our safety. Please don't do this. It's lying to you. Was he lying when he cured you? Where are your hearing aids, John? He has no need for those anymore. A moment of silence hangs in the air before the sound of rocks scattering resumes. Carter, can you pour me some water? The audio picks up the light sound of footsteps and a bag unzipping. Here, careful. John speaks in a whisper. Carter, listen to me. You have to stop him. We'll get out of here soon. It'll be all right. No, it won't be all right. Not if we let it leave. I know I sound crazy to you right now, but I can't explain it to you. Not without putting you in the same position as us. Just promise me you won't let us leave. You alone can survive. But bury us. Hang in there. Just 2 more days. Damn it. Carter, don't make me have to tell you. Tell me what? Why you tried to kill me? What I'm about to do to you is infinitely worse. Turn that damned recorder off. End of log 20. Log 21. One more day, just one more day. No words are spoken for 20 minutes. A soft croaking voice pipes up, although the words are unintelligible. We're all out of water. Sorry. Hang in there, buddy. Time? Almost 1400. Just one more day. Carter, let's talk. Just shut up, will you? Is it speaking to you yet? I told you to shut up. I'm gonna assume that was directed at it. Shut up. A minute of silence. Shut up. Followed by a weak chuckle from John. End of log 21. Log 22. Log 22 is 8 hours long. There are intermittences of silences, so for your understanding benefit, I will include a timestamp for when something of note resumes. I don't want to be down here with them. Yeah, well, I don't want Bob hearing us. He won't care. The only thing on his mind the past 12 hours is digging a way out. You think he can? Unlikely. You destroyed that recorder like I asked, right? A moment lingers before Carter replies. Yeah, right. So our only way to get out of here is the relief team. And if you're right, they'll be here in a few hours. They'll be here. You know we can't let them find us, right? There's a few seconds of silence. Doesn't reply. You know what it'll do if it gets out. So we just resign ourselves to a noble death for the greater good? We'd be lucky if it lets us die at all. John's words hang in the air. The silence is broken with a quiet sob. Fuck you. You wouldn't have believed me if I didn't tell you. So what then? We rot down here with the rest of them for eternity. They made the same sacrifice. For us. Don't you want to see her again? I'm doing this for her. Can't. It's been in your head long enough. And read the walls, right? Warnings of an idea to be left forgotten. John begins to cry out in pain. There is a thumping sound as something hits the floor. John, stop it. You make sure I remember you, and I'll make sure no one will ever hear your name again. You pathetic parasite. John's screaming intensified. Carter, damn it. Please let us go. The intensity of John's screams slowly dies down over an hour. Is John all right? Calm down. Merciful. You haven't taken a break since last night. Has it been that long? Then the relief team should be arriving soon. Yeah, about that. He asked you to stop me, didn't he? To ensure that we're not rescued. I bet that fool spoke of a noble sacrifice for the greater good. If he wants to be a martyr, then let him alone suffer. It will. He is not an it. He is a god. He is the Prometheus. He nurtured the flame within man. Gifted us with knowledge and wisdom to stand at the pinnacle of beings. And this was how they repaid him once they deemed him unnecessary. Hubris. He will unleash vengeance upon everyone if he gets out. Bob, perhaps. I'm sure his anger seems boundless now. There will come an end to his wrath. When the dust settles, we will be standing at his side. The atoms in his new Eden, after all, will be the messengers of his name. I'm sorry, Bob. Do you really wish to share the fates of those men down there? The unfathomable pain of existing as nothing more than a pile of decaying dust, forcibly held together by his will, to be buried in the dark for the rest of wet slashing sound interrupts Bob. A muffled, gurgling noise of viscous liquid pouring is heard. A loud thud follows as something heavy falls to the floor. Carter, I'm so sorry. John can be heard hysterically laughing in the background. A voiceless prophet. Gurgling cry of anguish echoes through the chamber, before quickly being stifled. I'm sorry. Can't let you share this curse. Note that the relief team they spoke of were scheduled to arrive on the site at 6:30. I think they're here. As if in response, a muffled sound of clothes starts ruffling and scraping across the... Shit. Hold him down. John, help me. John, what? Oh shit, stop him. More muffled struggling ensues until it slowly subsides. What's the matter with you, John? My ears. Took it back. There is a distorted sound of voices yelling in the distance. It's impossible to make out what the words were, but it definitely wasn't coming from the 4 men on the original team. Stay strong, Carter. Sacrificed. End of log 22. Upon the completion of this transcript, I had to know more of what happened to that team. I've already gone through all the files that came with the device. Other than the series of logs, none of the information I found pertained to anything that happened during the team's time on the site. I'm sure, like many of you would be, I was compelled to find out more. First place I looked was in the files of the secondary team that was to arrive on site on the 17th of May, 2019. Similar to the first set of files, there wasn't a lot to go through. Files did include another satellite communication device. This device was the original. There were only 2 logs in the device. The names in the following transcript have also been altered. Log 1, 517, Riley. This is Dr. Riley of the secondary team. We arrived on site 5 hours ago at 0700. Preliminary team is nowhere to be found. We already notified the PSD and the university. We've been looking for them all day, but there doesn't seem to be a single trace of them. They must still be here. There's no other way off the site unless they're willing to trek over 400 kilometers of barren desert. Not that they had any reason to. The rest of the team is scouring every last square meter of the site. We'll find them. I really hope John is okay. End of log 1. Log 2, Tev T. Riley. No, we're authorized to be here for the duration of the project. As far as anyone is concerned, that is still happening. A man responding to Riley speaks in a thick Arabic accent. This is no longer a research project. Your jurisdiction here is hereby revoked. We have arranged for you and your team to leave the country tomorrow morning on the earliest available flight. Please gather your team. You are to be transported off the site now. I'm not leaving without them. I'm afraid that is not up to you. It is no longer safe here. We are currently organizing efforts to search for your colleagues. Will you at least let us know if you find them? Know that these men have contributed greatly. Have a safe trip, Doctor. End of log 2. The research project was officially postponed indefinitely on the 18th of May 2019. There is no further information on the search effort for missing men. Even combing through social media, I found nothing. It was as if the missing researchers ceased to exist. The last known record of them are contained within the logs. I stated that there were only 22 logs at the beginning. There is, however, one last entry. It isn't transcribed as no words are spoken during the duration of the recording. In fact, the majority of log 23 is 27 hours of complete silence. Occasionally, I think I can hear air circulating, like soft labored breathing. 3 hours into the log, there's a spike in audio as a raspy gasp is heard, followed by the sound of stones shifting. This final log was received last week. The timestamp reads 09/18/2023, 11:06. I think they're still down there in the dark, with the rest. But as chilling as that was, the next tale will make your skin crawl even deeper. Grandma told me something terrifying on her deathbed. Hate to say it, but deep down I thought my grandma would never die. The old bat. Now, don't get me wrong, part of me loves her dearly, but damn, she was mean. At least now I know why. Byron, her voice hoarse just above a whisper, there's something you need to see. Her veiny blue hand trembled as it pointed to the old chest on the bedside dresser. The chest, which she's had for as long as I can remember, was locked. The chest is modest-sized and heavily jeweled. It looks important, and the fact that she brought it with her confirmed this. As a child, I often wondered what was in it, but over the years, I stopped caring. Probably just old photos. I opened it using a tiny gold key plucked from her key ring. As suspected, plethora of old-fashioned photos spilled out. A young grandpa with his long hair and tie-dyed gear posing in front of the shiny new GTO. Classic. Stacks of old report cards, and to my surprise, a Beatles concert ticket dating back to 1964. I was awestruck. How could my grandma, same grandma who raised me with a whip, same grandma who never let me out after dark until I turned 16 and stopped listening to her, be cool enough to see the Beatles in concert? Who knew? She was getting frustrated, watching me rummage through the relics. It was obvious she had little to no interest in these items, and that I'd better stop mucking about. Even in her current state, I feared her. When she's angry, she turns wicked and cruel. Like the time she locked me in my bedroom for an entire weekend, sneaking food scraps and water while I slept, all because I stood up to a bully at school. Jeesh. Drops of drool drizzled from her pasty lips as she flapped her wrinkled finger. Then I saw it. An old pamphlet, so old I could barely read the words. This? Her head started bobbing, her lips moving wordlessly. Her expression changed so suddenly, I dropped the pamphlet, just in case. She snatched it with remarkable speed, snapping like a crocodile. Her mouth shrank to the size of a pea. I groaned. The sooner I was out of this room, the better. In fact, I was wishing I'd never bothered coming here. As bad as that may sound. Grandma's eyes swelled. Tears trickled down her furrowed cheek. She stared at the pamphlet for an uncomfortable length of time. Then she did something I'll never forget. She spat a loogie and made the sign of the cross. I was stunned. Worse, I was terrified. Fear, as real as the falling rain battering the window outside this dimly lit hospice, flooded my heart. One could imagine her final fit of revenge before she leaves this cruel world. I seized the pamphlet, careful not to get her snot all over me. To my amazement, the pamphlet was older than the Beatles ticket. It was dated July 11th, 1957. Grandma would have been 13. She started convulsing, so I called for the hospice lady, who put a cold cloth over her head, gave her a shot, then left the room. Whatever was in the shot worked, because soon thereafter Grandma started speaking. In fact, she seemed better than she had in years, only briefly. Byron, she said, slowly, deliberately, there's something you need to know. She coughed. It was an awful sound, like a sputtering old train. She was pointing to the pamphlet, which read, Clarington's Summer Camp for Girls. Something happened, she said slowly, a very long time ago. And for the following half hour, I sat next to her, wooling her forehead with a damp cloth, listening to my cruel and dying grandma's bedside confessional. It's not what I'd expected, not even close, but it explained a lot. Here's what she told me. Life was simpler back then, but certainly not easier. Papa died in the war, so Ma took care of us. Me being the youngest of 7 siblings, we grew up poor. So poor, we only got one gift for Christmas. One, which we shared. Of course, Sean and Judy, the oldest, always got first dibs. When I turned 13, Ma made me get a job, so I worked as a camp counselor. I'd been going to that camp since I was 6 or 7, and I liked it. Most of it, that is. Camp was run by a wicked nun named Sister Christina, who would put the fear of God in you. Let me tell you. And she did, on many occasions. You'd never believe the things she did. The camp had a strict schedule. First thing in the morning, we'd all jump into the lake. Rain or shine. We'd share a bar of soap if they had any, then clean up before Mass. Problem was, I never could swim too good. But I learned to fake it. I had to, or else. You see, back in those days, you never disrespected your elders, especially the clergy. If they said swim, goddammit, you swam. Anyway, I'll get to the point. I can tell you're getting restless. You were always restless, Byron, especially as a boy. Grandma pauses for a sip of water. You ever seen someone die? This time it was me who coughed. Well, I did. It was the summer of '57, my first week of being camp counselor. Dorothy was her name. I'll never forget her, even if I tried. She was a wee little thing, no older than 11. I knew Dorothy couldn't swim, so when it came time to jump in the lake, she'd stand at the end of the dock, wailing. Being in charge meant I had to force her in the lake. There was no other choice. Rules were rules, they'd say. Remember, our parents and grandparents were war heroes, tough as nails. Failure was frowned upon, let me tell you. If we misbehaved, we'd get the strap, our mouths washed out with soap, or sometimes a good old-fashioned beating. You young'uns could use a bit of this tough love, if you ask me. You're too soft, selfish. But what do I know? I'm just a dying old coot. Anyways, Being afraid of the water myself, I could sympathize with Dorothy, but sympathy was a weakness. If Dorothy didn't get her skinny butt into the lake before Sister Christina came out, there would be hell to pay. Take it from someone who knows. Once, back when I was her age, maybe younger, I refused to jump in the lake. As punishment, I was boated into the middle of the lake and tossed in. "You'll sink or swim," the nun said. I watched, terrified, as the boat floated away. Cruel as it was, it worked. After the longest minute of my life, screaming for help that never came, I swam. God damn it, I swam. Dorothy, the poor child, was fragile and weak. I had to do something, and quick, so while the other girls were laughing and splashing about, I kicked her into the lake. Sploosh. She flew headfirst. Right about that time, the nun came marching towards the dock, carrying her dreaded pointing stick, and scolded us for making too much noise. It was almost time for church, she reminded us, so hurry it up. Sister Christina pulled me aside, said something about the itinerary for the day, then she disappeared inside the chapel. When I turned my attention back to the lake, relieved I wasn't reprimanded, I noticed one kid was missing, Dorothy. By now, most of the girls were drying themselves off, giggling about whatever girls giggled about back then. Probably, boys. "Where's Dorothy?" I asked. They shrugged. I did a head count just in case. 12, not 13. This was my first week on the job, like I needed to. I ran down to the edge of the dock, calling her name, scanning the white-capped water. "There!" someone shouted, pointing. I followed her hand until I saw the girl, bobbing up and down. "Do something," another girl shouted. I was in charge, and by the looks of the others, no one was going to help. No one dared call the nun, so it was up to me to save the girl. Now I know what you're thinking. You can't be a camp counselor unless you can swim, right? Correct. But like I said, I learned to fake it. Had to. There were no other options. Before I could chicken out, I jumped in the lake, holding a life preserver. Being tall for my age, I managed to walk most of the way, the water inches below by my chest. How cold the water was, I remember. Cold and dark. I hated the feeling of my feet touching the lake's floor. I could imagine all the gross stuff grabbing me. Fish nibbling, the rocks scraping my toes. A seaweed. But I kept going. By now, Dorothy disappeared. I plunked my head underwater, looking for her. The lake was murky and green. Couldn't see her. By now, the water reached my chin, even on my tippy toes. Not knowing it, I was crying. I hated my mother for making me do this stupid job. I told her I was unqualified, that I couldn't swim. Also, I hated the nun, who surely would punish me for this. Help. Dorothy was to my right, floundering. I swam. It's funny what you'll do under duress, because suddenly I felt like an Olympian, like a dolphin. The lake was furious. White caps pounding me into submission, and soon I grew tired, but my adrenaline was strong and kept me going. As I swam, something latched onto me, something strong, and I let go of the life preserver and watched it float away. Whatever latched onto me wasn't letting go. Panicking, I kicked and clawed, unsure what was happening, until suddenly I bumped into her. The girl's eyes were frozen with fear. When I reached out my hand, she grabbed it and started pulling me under. We struggled. Somehow, I managed to free myself and resurface. When I tried calling for help, I started choking. I was losing strength. Something stabbed my foot. A stick, perhaps, but not likely. We weren't alone. There was someone or something in the lake. We'd all heard the stories. Living this far north, where you're more likely to be mauled by bears than thieves, there were plenty of tall tales. This lake, for instance, was dubbed Monster Lake, for good reason. Every year, you'd hear stories of kids disappearing at the lake, their bodies never found. We used our imaginations. A large shadow, the size of an otter, maybe bigger, was circling us. Scared out of my wits, I grabbed the girl and started pulling her towards shore. For a moment, I thought she'd be saved. I really did. Then she got snagged. Dorothy wouldn't budge. The water turned crimson. Thinking it was my blood, I checked my body, searching for wounds. But it wasn't my blood. It was Dorothy's. Her tiny head bobbed one last time. Her green eyes found mine. In them, I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. The monster, if that's what it was, started clawing her to bits, thrashing her like a soggy rag doll. The amount of blood spewing from the girl was sickening. She didn't scream, I remember. She must have gone into shock. I grabbed her arm, trying to free her, when snap, her arm ripped off. The sheer force of it sent me sailing. Underwater, I saw the beastly thing. Its eyes were beady red bulbs. It had horns on its head like the devil and razor-sharp claws. Moments before she vanished, she spoke in my mind. Or maybe it was the monster pretending to be her. I don't know, but the words still haunt me to this day. "You're next, Mary." Somehow, by sheer will, I doggy paddled back to shore and was greeted by the nun. Lips pursed into a scowl, she forced me out of the lake, tugging my ears. I was blubbering like an idiot, pointing to the middle of the lake. If someone had helped me, I pleaded, the girl would still be alive. This all happened so fast. Maybe 5 minutes. 10. Tops. Then it was over. That's how long it takes to die. Grandma started tearing up. I don't recall what came next. I must have passed out. Because when I came to, I was in the office, being reamed out by the nun. My wrists were swollen from getting whipped, I remember. My ears hurt like hell. The police were there, staring at me accusingly, as though I was the killer. No one had cell phones back then, but there were plenty of witnesses. No one saw the monster, of course, and I was too scared to mention it. Word spread fast. This far north, disaster is merely a part of life. Hell, it wasn't the only death that summer. Some teenage boy fell off a cliff. The same month, if you can believe it. Same lake, too. After quitting my job, I made a promise that I'd never step foot in Monster Lake again, or any lake for that matter. And I kept to my word. But I cannot control my dreams, can I? Oh, how I wish I could. Maybe my life would have been different, happier perhaps. You see, I've returned to Monster Lake many times since then, but only in my dreams. The dreams were always the same. Dorothy drowning, and me trying to save her. But instead of saving the girl, I'd watch her drown, the lifeless eyes staring into mine. How many times can one girl die? This summer, however, Dorothy never came. That's what worries me, that somehow she's inside me, dragging me to the bottom of the lake. Lake of fire. It's time I pay for my sins, I suppose. Lord knows, I deserve it. Grandma's hand slipped from mine. I hadn't realized I was holding hers. She died right then and there. I was shocked, saddened even. Later that night when I got home, I researched Monster Lake. Turns out the camp closed sometime in the 80s as the tiny town of Hearst expanded. Houses were built, industries booming. Future was thrusted upon this northerly town, and there was no going back. Then I discovered something horrible. Nearing retirement, with my kids away at college, I recently purchased a lakeside cottage. A lifelong dream. Turns out it's the same spot as Clarington's summer camp for girls. Ugh, no wonder Grandma freaked out when I told her. Monster Lake is in my backyard. A million questions sprung to mind. Mostly, is it safe? Surely monsters aren't real, even this far north. Monster Lake was an urban legend. That's it, period. Then the unthinkable happened. I've started dreaming of Dorothy. I see her most nights when she comes to my bedroom window, tapping. She leads me towards the cold, dark lake. I watch helplessly as she falls in, head first. She begs for help. I jump into the lake. I try saving her, I really do, but something stops me. Monster. The lake turns blood red. I watch her drown. Before waking up, she screams her final warning. "You're next, Byram." If you thought that was unsettling, wait until you hear the terror that lurks in the shadows of this next story. What breed is my cat? I first got him in January. I was volunteering at the animal shelter when he was brought in. Skinny and shivering, Lou said he'd been left outside, probably dumped there by an abusive owner as their first and only act of kindness towards him. He was terrified. I brought him home with me that evening. By February, my hands were covered in little scratches, and I'd well and truly learnt my lesson about cuddles. He was a very proper cat. If he sat too still, you could almost mistake him for an ornate china ornament, with his sleek black coat and pointed ears. Even though he'd been through an awful time of it, you could just tell there was a very proud cat waiting to reappear. I named him Raymond, which he seemed to approve of. He started eating his dinner on the floor next to me, and would occasionally let me stroke his head without a hiss. By March, he would come to greet me at the door when I got home from work, skipping down the stairs from wherever he'd been dozing. His ribs had disappeared beneath his healthy coat, and his shiny green eyes seemed to smile at me. We were both doing well in April. My once scared cat, now become a confident, cuddly boy. I'd get to kiss him on the head goodbye as I left for my first few dates with Owen. Owen was charming and everything I'd ever dreamed of. I'd spend evenings with him in fancy restaurants, laughing away and hanging on to his every word. One evening in May, I was walking home from another wonderful evening when I tripped and fell smack bang in the middle of the pavement, leaving angry red grazes on each hand and knee. I hobbled home feeling sorry for myself and was greeted by a familiar mew at the door. I tried my best to give myself some first aid. When I climbed into bed, Raymond appeared at my side. He sniffed at the haphazard plasters and stared at me, his green eyes big and curious. "Nothing to worry about, Ray. I just tripped is all," I told him. Owen was always joking about how clumsy I could be. Raymond seemed to frown, wiggling his black tail in the air. Then, he leaned forward and gently pressed his head against my grazes. I'm not sure how he did it, but his eyes seemed to roll back into his head, and I could have sworn they then began to glow. He sat like that, completely still for a few seconds, before drifting off to sleep. When I peeled the plasters off the next morning, every mark had disappeared. Couldn't believe it. I spent ages running my fingers over my now smooth skin. Raymond just sat in the doorway and stared, his head tilted to the side. I wondered if I'd dreamed the whole thing, but in June it happened again. I'd been moving my things into Owen's flat when I'd caught my finger on his door latch, leaving a rather deep cut. Owen just tutted and went to pick up the box I'd dropped. Later, after Raymond had inspected our new home, came for his evening cuddle. Owen was at the pub by then, and he seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The poor cat was still so wary of certain people. I felt guilty for moving us in with Owen in a way, but he had insisted, and how could I say no? Raymond came to sit on my lap, and upon noticing my finger, his eyes immediately rolled back into his head and definitely glowed this time. I took off my bloody bandage to find again that any trace of the wound had vanished. Raymond purred softly as I stared at him, mouth agape. By the end of August, Raymond had healed a fair few scrapes and bruises for me. I'm ever so clumsy, of course, which Owen always ridiculed. If I'd known better, I'd have said he liked seeing me upset. Sometimes he would come home drunk and accidentally push me. On one occasion, he did this when I was cooking at the hob, and Raymond seemed to use all of his might, healing my seeping burn. I spent an awful lot of time in pain, and the rest lonely. I'd stopped volunteering at the animal shelter a few weeks before, when Owen and I decided I should be working more hours to help pay the rent. I missed Lou, and I missed my friends. We lived quite far from my parents too now, and I missed having friendly conversations that weren't just with Owen on a good day. I still had Raymond, though. September went by in a bit of a blur. I found myself stuck in an unnerving state of trying to do everything just right. I would walk home from work slowly, savoring my time in the cold and the dark. Not too slowly, or Owen would question where I had been, and with who. I didn't see anyone nowadays. I would make sure the dinner I made was exactly to Owen's standards, even though I knew that most of the time there would be a tiny, unseen detail that would set him off. He'd leave in a huff, taking my car to the pub round the corner. I'd sit in silence with Raymond while he was gone. I felt trapped. Raymond would give me a nudge or a purr, anything to get my attention, but I was frozen. I only moved again when I heard the door slam. I would look down at Raymond. He knew he was in for a long night too. In October, on Halloween, things reached rock bottom. I was lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling, when I heard Raymond gently push open the door. I'd been so worried about him. Owen had come home drunk, again, and almost tripped over Raymond, who was sleeping peacefully on the rug. I'd instinctively jumped up, rushing to keep my precious cat safe. Owen didn't like that. Now I was on the floor, and I couldn't get up. I couldn't do much of anything anymore. "I'm sorry, Raymond," I whispered, feeling my lip begin to bleed again. I started to cry, and the tears stunned my swollen eyes. "I'm sorry I brought us here." He gently brushed his face against my blackened cheek, and I felt like dirt. My tears splashed against the cold floorboards. Raymond deserved so much more than being stuck with me. I couldn't even keep him safe. The door slammed suddenly. I had to grit my teeth to keep from screaming when my broken bones ground together as I jumped. Owen was home. His heavy footsteps dragged through the hall, the sickly smell of whiskey surrounding him like a storm cloud. He swayed as he came into the room. His bloodshot eyes quickly focused on me. He walked over and let out a chuckle, giving my snapped leg a swift kick. "Get up," and he sneered. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to move, but the sharp pain in my chest pinned me to the floor. My breath was coming in shallow gasps, and my broken ribs felt like knives carving into my lungs. "Pathetic," Owen spat. "Laying there feeling sorry for yourself. This is your fault. It always is." Raymond began to growl beside me, but Owen ignored it. He dug his fingers into my swollen face. "You're completely useless now." Raymond hissed. Something had changed in him. His sleek black form, normally so calm, was now tensed. His muscles rippled beneath his fur, and his green eyes honed in on Owen. They began to glow eerily under the flickering light. Owen laughed, releasing his grip on my jaw. "Oh, look at this. Your stupid cat. He'll protect you." Before Owen could reach out for him, something in the air shifted. The pressure dropped and the room felt heavy. Raymond's growl deepened, sounding far more primal. His eyes weren't just glowing anymore. They were burning. Owen staggered back, his face contorting into confusion and then pain. "What the hell?" he started, his words cut off by a scream. I could only watch wide-eyed as Owen's body began to jerk violently. His arm twisted, the bones snapping with a sickening crunch. He screamed again, the sound ripping from his throat as his skin began to stretch and split. Hot blood oozed from the cracks like lava. My own injuries, the burns, the broken bones, the bruises, began to fade. I felt them peeling from my body as Raymond had done 100 times before. But this time, he was putting them straight into Owen. His knees buckled as another snap echoed through the room. His leg was bent at an impossible angle, the flesh tearing as though he was being pulled apart from the inside out. "Raymond? No," I whispered, but the word felt hollow. Could I even stop him? Did I even want to, really? The cat's gaze never left Owen. His tail flicked in a deliberate motion, and Owen screamed again. This time it was louder, higher pitched, as his ribs caved inwards with a wet, crunching sound. Despite everything that he'd done, I hoped that the alcohol was dulling some of the pain, at least a tiny bit. Owen convulsed as his spine twisted, vertebrae snapping like dry twigs. Blood sprayed from his mouth, and his hands clawed uselessly in the air. He was reaching out for me. Over the next few minutes, I squeezed my eyes closed as I listened to every crack and snap. It was slow and deliberate. Raymond was savoring this. Finally, Owen collapsed onto his front. His body was barely recognizable, and a shudder racked through me as I realized it was a mirror image to how mine had looked only an hour before. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. He looked at me, trying to plead, his eyes wide with terror. He was a wounded animal. I don't know what came over me, but I looked over at Raymond and nodded. I looked away when my cat's jaw began to unhinge, stretching wider than it should ever be able to. I still heard, though, the sound of Owen disappearing into the gaping maw. I heard the crunch. When I turned back around, Raymond was a cat once more. He licked his paw and used it to wipe a drop of blood from his sleek head. There was no sign of the monster I had seen only seconds before. There was no trace at all of Owen. Raymond purred contentedly. It's December now, and things are much different. My parents hug me goodbye on their way to work, and usually Dad makes me breakfast even when I insist I'm not hungry. He says I'm much too thin. In the evening, we spend time together as a family, the wood burner crackling and Raymond sleeping soundly in front of it. I tell myself that I'm safe now, that it's over. But as I look at him sleeping there, I wonder what else he's capable of. I don't know if I'll ever feel like myself again. I don't really remember who she is. I have nightmares most nights. The sound of shouting will echo through my head, followed by the snapping of bones. My mom helps me talk about what happened. Well, most of it. The important thing is that it's all over. While I've been recovering, I've been trying my best to do some research. I'm still not 100% sure what breed Raymond is, though. I just know that he's a very, very good cat. And just when you think it can't get any darker, the horrors continue with this next unsettling account. I have seen the depths of fear in a lost forest of marble. Has anyone also? In the olden streets of Brazil, there are many run-down houses, some abandoned, some just left to rot by the owners, while their busy day-to-day life leaves them no time to take care of home. The only sign of residence being dim lights inside, or the eventual rabid barking dog in the yard. On my street, There was this once luxurious house. We would even call it a mansion, given the size and the detailed architecture that could still be seen between rubble and growing, overtaking foliage. The lights were always dimly on, the gates and windows always closed, ever slightly so. The ominous title may seem hyperbolic, but I have ventured deep into the depths of fear once when urban exploring there. I had an adrenaline addiction when I was a child, and have always been fascinated with urban exploration. This was amongst the first few times and was the last I ever partook in the activity myself. I had dived into a realm of no man's making. Adulthood and law school made me a dull man, so I post this also as a hallmark of my own adventures. The kids would always make up ghost stories about the place. There was a huge yard that seemed to span endlessly to the sides and to the back of the house, never ending in what you could see. The tall grass that sprawled about the ground and big, thick foliage trees that grew created a pseudo-forest full of rubble. Tales of monsters, killers, and aberration. Very few ever tried going into the terrain of that house, although everyone in our friend group was dared to do so, mostly by me. The lights that gave the impression of someone being inside, and the loud barking of a large dog that started shortly after anyone set foot inside the yard. In the rare occasions anyone dared so, were enough to discourage venturing further, no matter the ever-looming allure of the place. One lightly rainy day during summer vacation, I must have been 12 years old or so, I was the only one among my friends to have been left on the street, as everyone was out enjoying the beach, and my family decided to stay for the holiday. Feeling bored and ever so brave, young lonesome me decided to jump the fence and go further than the tall grass of the front yard this time. I was armed with a kitchen knife I snuck out with and a flashlight, because every good urban explorer absolutely needs a flashlight. When I set foot in the yard, I heard the loud barking of always. This time, I decided to stay my ground. We never saw the dog, though it must be leashed somewhere it could not get to me. After a short time, the barking stopped. I set forward, the house seeming bigger than ever before, standing tall as a skyscraper above my head, and the trees facing me with the daring intent to swallow me in their leaves. The front door would not be a smart idea, as there could be someone inside, and it seemed sturdy enough I wouldn't be able to open it by myself anyways. I took a deep breath and walked into the dark foliage, tiptoeing over rubble, bricks and concrete, leaves and tree roots, rustling through the branches until I fell into a clearing. I didn't exactly fall, felt like I was pushed. Between the low vision ahead of me and the unstable ground, I couldn't be sure. The place was hauntingly stunning. The backyard of the house seemed to go on for miles. The place was littered with sculptures that formed a sculpted marble forest of their own. Big bronze statues of Chinese dragons, Buddhas big and small, tall and weathered arches that one would think made up a larger building a long time ago sprawled all over the place, however with no cohesion or seeming purpose to their placement. There were many frowning demon faces that one would sometimes see in front of homes to ward off evil spirits. Umbanda symbolism strewn about the ground with crosses and dream catchers hanging from jutting gargoyle fingers. Hindu architecture, from what it seemed, awkwardly mixed with the shapes of traditional Portuguese or perhaps Italian buildings, the country's founding. On one side of the yard, quite far away, there seemed to be a ruined, modern-looking construction, cross-cut to reveal an interior filled with greenery. So many ornaments laying everywhere. From several cultures, a cacophony of styles. I was mesmerized by the place. The dark and gloomy afternoon sky seemed to open with rays of light that shone shyly on the more intricate and larger pieces of whatever was ahead of me. I then heard a loud, sharp scream. Howl, maybe, a shriek, a gurgle. I ran instinctively, in between the large ornaments, inside the arches, until I saw what seemed like a shed, what would be one if not for the immense pagoda tower that reached to heights I dared not fully inspect in my fearful run. I went in and shut the door. Gasping for air, I then froze thinking of what I'd gotten myself into. I remembered the knife and pulled it out of my pocket. Whatever was running after me had stopped. Did anything come running after me? Silent. Every sound suddenly stopped. I could not hear my own breathing, as loud as it was before. The clicking of teeth broke the dead silence, the hushed, moaned breathing of something big. I looked at the window beside me. The decapitated head of a large bull stood there, clicking and clacking its teeth, maddened eyes rolling about in their sockets, staring at me, at the walls, at nothing, and at me. I ran out the door. At the place where the sculptures outside stood, there flashed imagery of a dark bog, white, bloated bodies everywhere. Dead people halfway buried into the ground, sunken into the water, eyes still blinking and mouths moving. The scenery then reverted into the lush garden of everything where I once was, and I sprinted back to front of the house. I heard the galloping of a huge thing and a gurgling bellow. I felt scared, but the feeling came and went. Wonder and fascination intertwined and alternated between happiness and sadness. I stopped for a moment, apathy overtook me, and faced back. A headless human slithered towards me. When it came so close, I could feel our atoms intermingle. I saw a crazed round eye in a pitch-black void stare me down. I stabbed it with my knife and kept on running. I felt nothing, emotionally or physically, as I plowed through the leaves. Branches and rubble that before felt so heavy and impeding to walk in. I heard the whimper of a dog as I jumped the wire fence to the outside, hitting my face on the concrete because of my hasty dive. I woke up in my bed. My parents were not home yet. Still in the supermarket buying groceries, I presumed. The darkness of the twilight was setting in, leaving my home in a dimly lit gloom. The light posts outside churning an orange glow onto the bedside. It all felt like a dream, and I would take it as such were it not for the dirt in my clothes and the cuts in my arms left by my adventure in the forest of leaves and concrete. My flashlight was left in the door to my room, the light on, facing me. The battery seemed to die as it wound off. Ever since that day, I had grown a huge admiration for urban explorers. As the city keeps its memories of olden times and deep deeds buried in its entrails, anomalies lie in the wake of wonder. And perhaps my experience isn't so unique, as many more abandoned marbled forests lay in towns and cities worldwide. To this day, I every so often have dreams of a bull's head gnashing teeth from across a hallway, or an arched stairway littered with buddhas and bones, reaching to a blackened bog in impossible geometry above me. Remnants of trauma, or maybe a specter of that place haunting me. I posted this story to perhaps know if anyone has delved in places like this, and maybe share their story here. Has anyone? But darkness never sleeps, and what's coming next will make you question reality itself. Do Not Go to Senn Station up in central Pennsylvania, a little ways east of State College, is an old railroad station in the town of Senn. Do not, under any circumstances, go there. Railroad station is a little bit generous. It is an ancient, rotting shack next to the tracks with a trash heap 30 feet off in the woods. I had seen people talking about it on the internet. Urban explorers mostly, although it could hardly be classified as urban. The town of Senn didn't even exist, really. It was a post office and a grocery store and 13 houses within the mile radius of the town. It was one of those places you go somewhere else. At first, I had no intention of going. Senn Station wasn't haunted. There were no ghosts, no mysteries, just an old, rotting train station from Pennsylvania's glory days. But me and my dad were already heading up there for college tours anyways. Penn State was my top choice, and my dad was an alumni. We had the hotel for 4 nights, and the tour wasn't until Monday. He had left early Saturday morning with a friend for Pittsburgh, so I was left in the hotel with the car. Somewhere, in my underdeveloped mind, I decided to go check the place out. I had nothing better to do, and I was always the outdoorsy type. Even if there was nothing interesting, would still be a walk in the woods. The internet's accounts were all strangely stilted. Not like they were gatekeeping and just didn't want to talk about it, but like they didn't know what to say. The general consensus was not to go. That, as one strange user wrote, it would reach inside and twist you and leave you spinning for the rest of your life. The drive was only about an hour and a half. Towards the end, I was speeding down the empty 2-lane roads, watching the trees go past in a blur. They were just starting to turn brown, their edges tinged a rich copper. It was really hard to find. I parked my car in the back of the grocery store parking lot and started walking along Laurel State towards the general location I found on Google Maps. All the trees looked the same. There was no obvious path like you would expect from a train station. Even though it was basically just a rest stop, piss and stretch your legs kind of place, there still would have needed to be maintenance crews and stuff. Eventually, I decided to screw it and just head into the forest. Once I was in there, it wasn't very hard to find. There was a sign peeking through the trees, and the tracks cut visibly through the underbrush. Send Station in all of its glory. It proved, as expected, to just be dilapidated tracks next to a wooden hut. Tracks weren't interesting, and the shack was full of nothing but a mummified squirrel and old railroad ties. I pushed the door open with mild disappointment. I concluded that the people on the internet were just hiding their smoke spot, which was kind of cool if you squinted, and resolved to head back. It wasn't even 11 yet, so I could have all day to fuck around back at the hotel. As I walked back towards the road, I suddenly remembered to go check out the trash pile they had talked about. There would probably be something interesting, maybe an old Coke bottle or some coins, something that would make it worthwhile. So I turned to trek the other way, back past the shack and the sign, and towards the small clearing I had faintly glimpsed earlier. And almost disappointingly, it was just trash. Cool vintage trash, but still trash. With a sigh, I crouched down to start searching through it. All in all, I got a pretty good haul. A couple old bottles, a pocket full of bottle caps, and an old pair of glasses. I was just standing back up when I felt the pile shift under me. I panicked, thinking I had ruined the structural stability of the heap and would fall into the pile of broken glass and tetanus. But after a few seconds of breathlessness, I was able to ease myself back to the ground. Curiously, I grabbed a small rock and threw that at the pile. It shifted, paused, then shifted again. I threw another one. The trash was starting to expand and contract rhythmically. Like a bear waking up from hibernation, it rumbled and clanked, and I felt the air change imperceptibly. The way you know when someone has walked into a room, except I was alone with this thing. I was frozen in my spot, mindlessly watching the heap of junk shudder. There was this liquid oozing from it, a rusty brown translucent oil that seeped from the cracks and ran down the sides. Cold feeling of dread settled in my stomach. I felt my gut clench, like I had stumbled upon something I was never meant to see. It yawned and groaned and shuddered in the autumn wind. On weak legs, I managed to find my way back to the shack. Its decaying form was a godsend. I sat down on the stairs, keeping my eyes trained on the thing in the distance. Planks echoed through the trees like a bird's song. I don't know why I felt the need to watch it. I had watched over my shoulder the entire time I was walking away. It wasn't moving. I doubted it even could move, but the most primitive parts of my brain were screaming at me to keep my eyes on it. The bottle caps in my pocket jangled. I had left everything else by the pile, but the caps had been forgotten. They kept on jangling. My hand felt like lead as I reached to grab them. They were like baby crabs, wriggly and writhing in my palm. I don't know how, but they clung to me when I tried to drop them. The ridges of the caps pinched my skin as they held on, the metal twisting and writhing. I shook my arm, but they just used the momentum to start climbing. I used my other hand to start ripping them off of me. One by one, I grabbed and twisted and threw them to the ground. Once they were on the ground, they started running back towards the trash heap. But each one took a chunk of my skin with it. By the time they were all off me, my arm was covered in cuts and the red, oily liquid from the pile. I watched as they scurried back to the pile, using their ridges like centipedes. After a while, the clanking eased. The rumbling subsided, and I was left in the silent forest. Nothing else was making a sound. I don't know if everything ran away, or if they all instinctively knew to be quiet, to hide. The sun was high in the sky before I made my way back to the road. My hands and arm were still covered in the greasy liquid, clung to my skin and soaked in. I made each step carefully, placing my feet on the softest patches of ferns and moss. I felt the heavy certainty that if I made a sound, if I caused a disturbance, it would wake up again. Even after I made it to the road, the dread still hung on to my mind. I was running the whole way back, my mind replaying the path over and over again. My car door opened with a click, oily liquid leaving a residue on the handle. It soaked into the steering wheel and the seatbelt like a plague. Relief was short-lived. Maybe 10 minutes into the drive, I felt the steering wheel shudder. I froze, almost driving myself into a tree before I got a grip. It tensed when I grabbed it, flinching as I turned to get myself back into the lane. My sole focus was getting back to the hotel. As the steering wheel continued to protest and the seatbelt constricted against my stomach and the seat started to breathe underneath of me, I kept my eyes on the road. By the 45-minute mark, my car had a heartbeat. I felt it in the seat, in the steering wheel. It echoed through the cabin like the drums of hell. Ba-dump. Ba-dump. The air in the car ebbed and flowed with breath, the oily substance secreting from the leather and the dashboard and the air vents. My brain was screaming at me, yelling and beating my head to get out. My only thoughts were plans on how to break out of the car if it kept its door closed, if it pressed up its windows. Send Station was the devil's own Garden of Eden, and I had inadvertently brought his creation out into the world. It was breathing and beating and being around me in a way that metal and plastic should not. The second I saw the first buildings in State College, I turned off the road and drove into a patch of trees. Car flinched and shuddered as I rammed it through the branches. When I went to grab the keys, they released with a faint squelch. The door opened like a mouth, the red oily substance lining the frame. The seatbelt retracted back into the car with a hiss of pain, making the whole thing flinch again. I chucked the keys as far into the woods as I could. The car continued to shudder and groan behind B, the door shutting itself with a burst of uncomfortably warm air. I ran the whole way back to the hotel. There were people around, so the animal parts of my brain protested less at my noise. The first thing I did was wash my hands and arms with all the soap in the room. Off of me, but now it's just flowing down the pipes into the sewers. I can see it in my head, the pipes starting to flex and squeeze. I called my dad, but he didn't pick up. I called my mom, and she's already on her way with her car. But I don't know what I'm going to tell them. Nobody is going to believe me. I'm spinning and spinning and spinning. I'm writing this because I need to get it out. I need to tell anyone, but I don't even know what I'm telling. Do not go to Send Station. There's nothing there for you. As one nightmare ends, another begins. Brace yourself for a tale far more sinister. I'm a 911 operator, and some of our calls are strange. Hey, Kylie here. First things first. Allison and I are both still alive. Thanks for the tips and thoughts. Been a bit busy, so sorry for the late update. Secondly, to the prick that sent me the angry DM because he couldn't find me in Greenbrier, Michigan. Wrong state, asshole. Someone suggested Allison should buy a gun. She can't really. She's only 19, so she can't own anything semi-automatic or a handgun in this state. But I can. I told the guy I wanted something that could handle a bear. I might have lied about a trip to Alaska. Anyways, after test firing a few, I settled on a 10mm gun. He called it a 2-stack. Instead of 8 shots, I have 16. I wanted something that I could use to protect us because we went right back to work. I know it sounds crazy, Jordan insisted. And it makes sense. People still need to be able to contact 911. Chuck and Andy can only handle it on their own for so long. With Allison's parents still in Europe, she would be safer at the call center than alone at home. The police department had a cruiser sitting there as well. And I'm glad they did, as this town is going crazy. Did you guys know you can buy a gun, pass the background check, and then you have to wait 10 business days to pick it up? Not ideal when you're in a situation where you might be attacked at any moment. Luckily, I have friends. I won't say who, but someone lent me a Glock. He made me go to the range with him 3 days in a row before he would let me take it home, but that's still better than what the gun shop is requiring. Like I said earlier, we went back to work right after the attack. Jordan basically said show up on time or be fired. And since I have a mortgage and like eating, here I am. On the bright side, the doors are back in place, gate has been fixed, and now closes. Oh, and there's a patrol car parked across the driveway. So I'm actually not feeling too bad about coming back. Allison was a little more reluctant, but when the alternative is staying home alone, she quickly agreed to come in. A few of you brought up some good points. How did the killer lumberjack find Allison? Why was Jordan so calm in the face of death? I don't have an answer for either. Maybe he heard her voice on the phone, or he's following her? I don't know. Jordan is an enigma himself. I don't hate him like my coworkers, but I'm not a fan of him either. But then after he stood up for us like that, I don't know. His past is pretty blank, and he's super quiet about his personal life. There is one thing that happened. So I came in to work with Allison. Just like normal, Jordan was in his office, but then the stars aligned. Allison was on a call with a very unhappy resident concerning their missing groceries, and Jordan went outside. I don't know if he's ever gone outside during a shift or even used the restroom. Anyways, his office was left unattended. I don't know what came over me. I rushed over to Jordan's office. A quick glance at the monitor showed he was outside walking the perimeter of the building. His desk was mostly bare. 2 call reports lay on one side and a notepad on the other. The notepad was blank. Lots of pages had been ripped from it. First drawer I opened was filled with reports. I glanced at the monitor again. He was rounding the 3rd corner. I didn't have much time. The second drawer on the right-hand side was locked. Shifting my focus to the left-hand side, I opened the bottom drawer. The only thing inside was a black leather book. Jordan was entering the lobby. I flipped through a couple pages. Names, nothing but names. They all had green or red lines through them. I heard the first metal door open. I turned and rushed back to my stall and put my headset back on. I let out a shaky breath just as Jordan entered. He walked to his office, paused, turned to look at me for a moment, then went in his office. I hadn't recognized any of the names. I Googled a few that I could remember, but didn't get anything solid. I'll have to bid my time and try again later. I would say I'm pretty friendly with everyone at Greenbrier PD and FD. I'm probably closest with one of the newer officers. Dean has been with Greenbrier PD 3 years now. Dean and I grab drinks at the diner occasionally. I wouldn't say we're dating. We just hang out one-on-one from time to time. One of these times, they had a $2 Long Island iced tea special. $38 later, we were sloshed. There was no way either of us was going to drive. My house isn't far from the diner, so we stumbled our way there and crashed on the couch. This wasn't uncommon. We'd often sleep off the night. Him on the couch and me in my room, before heading our separate ways in the morning. But something was bothering Dean that night. He was uncharacteristically quiet. I asked him about it once we were settled in. At first, he didn't want to talk about it. Maybe the alcohol loosened him up. Or maybe it was just the vibe we had going that night, but he told me his story. Did you see that boat being towed past the diner as we walked out? I shook my head. I hadn't noticed any boats, but I wasn't exactly looking either. Dean leaned back on the couch. That was a 21-foot 1972 Starcraft Starchief. He stared at my ceiling quietly. I responded tentatively, unsure of what brought on this somber mood. I wasn't aware you were a boat guy. A small laugh died on my lips when I saw the tear running down his cheek. I wasn't a good kid in high school, he began. Not like drug use or anything like that. I was just super edgy and thought I was too cool to be friends with other kids. Looking back, I was just a dick for no reason. I barely graduated. I think they just wanted to get rid of me, really. After that, I enlisted. Not because of some sense of duty. I didn't want to work, and the army seemed like a way to make money. And I thought it would make me look cool. You would think that would have straightened me out, but instead, I spent 6 years doing the minimum. I never left the country, and when it came time to re-up, it was made clear to me that I shouldn't. So I went back home. I squandered my GI Bill on some dumb online college courses. By this time, my parents were about done with me. They told me to get a job or get out of the house. They would support me for 3 more months, and then that was it. Dean smiled at the memory. I tell you what, at the time I was pissed. Now I can see they had way more patience than I deserved. Anyways, that's when I applied to be a cop. There was a shortage, so I had no issues getting in. I'll skip all the boring parts. What changed everything for me happened on a rainy October day. I was mad before I even arrived at the call. A simple domestic disturbance. A homeowner called to report someone on their property. I was the rookie, and it was raining, so I got sent out to deal with it. He paused for a moment, the memory weighing heavily on it. I arrived at a very nice beach house. The homeowner was a lady in her 60s. She was polite enough. She explained someone had beached their boat in front of her house and was acting weird. I made my way to the backyard. Sure enough, just a dozen feet off the shore was a ragged starcraft, and attempting to push it into deeper water was a gaunt-looking woman. She was probably in her early 20s, but the soiled clothes and sunken skin made her look older. She had that trademark erratic movement about her that all tweakers have. It wasn't uncommon. Drug addicts would often acquire boats and live in them for a time. Oftentimes they would sink or, like this one, get stuck somewhere. And that was my first mistake. I assumed she was just another junkie. I yelled at her to come ashore. She ignored me and kept trying to push the boat. The tide was going out. She was never going to move the boat until it came back in. I yelled a few more times, but she wouldn't listen. I radioed in, and they told me to figure it out. So I walked through the knee-deep water absolutely livid. My boots and pants were soaked with seawater. She kept screaming about how she needed more water. I tried to grab her, but she ran around the boat. It chased her in circles a few times, cussing her out the whole time. She had this illogical panic about her. She kept pleading with me to listen, but I was done listening. Ask, tell, force. That's what I had been taught when it came to non-compliant suspects. She wouldn't stop running, and she was a good deal faster than me. So I pulled out my taser and popped her. She went rigid, just long enough for me to grab her. It was like giving a cat a bath. She screamed and clawed. She begged me to let her go back to the boat. I didn't listen. I dragged her inch by inch to the beach. By this point, she was sobbing and begging me to let her go. I wouldn't. I threw her onto the beach and loaded another cartridge into the taser. I didn't need it, though. She lay on the beach convulsing, her eyes so wide and filled with terror, I thought they would pop out of her head. Dean sniffed and wiped another tear. I had spent so many years fantasizing about being a hero, you know? I wanted to be the guy everyone respected, maybe even feared. I wanted to be the guy that stopped people from hurting others. Instead, I stood over the body of a terrified girl. She died right there on the beach. Coroner said it was likely a fear-induced heart attack. She had been scared to death. I never got in trouble for it. I wanted to. I got real low after that. I planned on leaving the force and probably leaving this life. But I didn't. If I left after that, her death would have meant nothing. Instead, I started to dedicate my career and my life to helping people. Every day I try to be the best I can. Pay back that unpayable debt. Dean, surely you can't blame yourself for someone overdosing? Even if you lacked any empathy, it's still not your fault. He didn't look away from the ceiling when he replied. It wasn't an overdose, Kay. She had nothing in her system. No signs of any use at all. This town isn't the only place with weird occurrences. It's funny, I had started to feel like I had atoned in a way. Then that boat went past. All I could see were those dead eyes looking up. I don't know what unfathomable terror she was running from, but I wish I had taken the time to listen. We went to sleep after that. Dean drifted off with his head on my lap. I didn't want to disturb him, not after that trauma dump. When I woke up in the morning, he was gone. I thought about our conversation. It didn't fit the Dean I knew, but I had only known him a couple years. Maybe the happy-go-lucky guy I knew really was a total dick in his past, but it wasn't who he was now. I don't know, I feel like this town pulls troubled people in. Things are escalating. It used to be we would get a couple unexplainable calls a month, then they became nearly every week. Even when we got multiple a week, I wasn't scared. I always had that degree of separation. I don't have that safety net anymore. It's not just Allison and the lumberjack either. I think I'm being targeted. We were about to finish up our shift. Allison was pretty upset. She had received a no-info distress call. It happens sometimes, and it's horrible every single time. She had answered the phone like normal. Before she could say anything, a female voice screamed in mortal terror. The phone went dead mid-scream. You know how when you're applying a tourniquet and there's that difference between bleeding and bleeding out? Screams are like that. There's the screams of fear that we hear all the time, and then there is the type of scream that, you know, the person doing it didn't survive. It's a real punch to the gut. Allison followed protocol. She dialed the number back, but it wouldn't go through. She tried all her options, and nothing worked. The caller was gone, and it was time to report it and move on. Poor girl was clearly haunted by the event. I suggested we go for a walk before heading home, something to help leave work behind. Allison wasn't super into the idea, but I insisted. There was a trail on the far side of town. It was wooded, but only a little. It basically was a patch of trees near a pond with a playground nearby. Lots of people would be there, so there would be little chance of running into trouble. Just to be safe, I texted my plan to my friend on the police force, and he assured me he would be close by. The trail was a small 2-mile loop around the pond. Allison watched the joggers go past longingly. I miss not being scared. I want things to go back to normal, she said. I couldn't help but agree. I know what you mean. It's like everyday things get a little more chaotic. We walked up the small incline into the wooded portion of the trail. Allison seemed to be more relaxed. Nature looked to be doing her some good. I got that unwelcome prickling feeling. My pace slowed and Allison noticed. "What is it, Kylie?" She had a look of acceptance on her face. Like weird shit was the new normal. "I don't know. Something just feels off." Allison looked around. The trees looked normal. The birds flittered from branch to branch. She turned around. "I'm out. Let's go home." I agreed. We walked uphill in the direction of the parking lot. I stopped. Allison looked at me again. "What's up?" I looked over my shoulder at the uphill stretch behind us. I shook my head. "Nothing. Just a trick of the light, I guess. Let's just go." So we walked up the hill into the wooded section of the trail. This time it was Allison who stopped. "Okay, maybe I'm crazy, but isn't this the wrong way?" She was right. We needed to go back to the parking lot. Somehow we had gotten turned around. "No, you're right," I confirmed. "We need to be going the other way." Though we turned and started walking uphill into the wooded section. I had a headache coming on suddenly. It was making it hard to focus. Allison grabbed my arm, roughly pulling me to a stop. "Kylie, we're going the wrong way." Ahead of us was the uphill stretch leading into the wooded section. Panic was rising within her. She looked around us frantically. "Kylie, what the heck is going on?" My head felt like it was splitting in half. I couldn't focus on my surroundings. Okay, enough of this. I pulled out my phone and called Dean. Phone beeped at me before shutting off. "Great, just great." I resisted the urge to throw it into the pond. "Let's continue in a single direction for 100 steps, then see if that gets us anywhere." Allison agreed to try it. I found myself unconsciously leaning on Allison. Her red hair kept blowing into my face. I turned my head to get the hair out of my mouth, and for just a second I thought I saw something. Maybe someone moving through the woods to our right. I looked closer and saw nothing. Allison said, 100. Okay, now what? I shivered. The air felt colder. "Kylie? That was 100 steps. Do we keep going or turn back?" Behind us, I saw the downhill portion of the trail was getting absorbed by a thick mist. I tugged Allison forward suddenly, no longer needing her support. "Let's go." Allison was shivering as well. It had been hot when we left the car. Both of us were dressed in t-shirts and shorts. Breeze drifted up from behind us. It was so cold. I gasped as its icy fingers dived into my lungs. Our walk had become a fast jog. Deep down, I knew that mist was bad. I could tell we didn't want it to touch us. Allison grabbed my hand and pulled me off the trail. I followed her as best I could. We burst out into a small clearing. The sun was out again. Birds were singing in the trees. I was bent over trying to catch my breath. Allison stood there soaking in the sun. In the lighting, she looked different. Her pale skin made her red hair appear to be glowing in contrast. When she turned to help me up, I almost recoiled away. For just a moment, her eyes had appeared black. But they weren't. They were still the same dark brown as before. "Look," said Allison as she pointed to a gap in the trees. Just ahead was the playground. Could see and hear kids playing joyfully. With a little more caution than was probably necessary, we approached the playground. I could see our car in the parking lot next to it. Everything was normal again. No mist, no never-ending hills, no figures in the woods. We went straight home. I took a shower, and Allison picked Princess Bride from my movie collection. I'm still on edge. I contemplated calling Dean, but at this point, what good would it do? Grabbing a blanket, I settled in on the couch with Allison. Something bumped downstairs. I sat up, instantly awake. Allison continued to snore softly beside me. We had fallen asleep during the movie. My house is tall and skinny. The ground floor had the kitchen, bathroom, and entryway. Upstairs, where we currently were, had 2 bedrooms and a small living room area. I carefully climbed out from under the blanket, doing my best to not wake Allison. She stirred slightly, but her breathing remained rhythmic. I wasn't sure if I had heard something, and I really didn't want to scare her with a false alarm. My bare feet moved silently across the soft carpet. I opened my bedroom door. I lifted up on it so it wouldn't squeak. On the headboard of my bed lay the borrowed Glock. Taking it in my hand, I checked for the glint of brass. It was ready to fire. I stepped gingerly onto the stairs, sweat on my hand compromising my grip on the gun. Ground floor was pitch black. For once, I hadn't forgotten a light on. The occasional passing car offered flashes of illumination. Blood rushed through my ears, creating an artificial roar in the silence. My heart beat hard as I set foot on the cool tile of my kitchen. Sweeping left to right, I checked the small house. Reaching the front door, I tested the knob, unlocked. Couldn't remember if I'd locked it or not. The house was empty. I breathed a sigh of relief. Except for the basement. I hated myself for thinking about it. I had only gone in a couple times in the years I had lived here, just to take out and put away seasonal decorations. I opened the door. The darkness below made my unlit house look like a sunny day. It was as if existence itself ended just past my feet. I stepped into it. Old wood steps creaked with each footfall. I blindly felt around for the string that dangled from the single light bulb at the bottom of the steps. Finding it, I pulled down. Click, the light came on. Its dim yellow light, chasing away the shadows for a moment. The basement was divided into 2 rooms. Floor was dirty and damp, the walls and ceiling unfinished, exposing the inner guts of my home. First room was empty and bare. I moved through it quickly. The second room was filled with junk from the previous owners as well as myself. Stepping over boxes and ducking under various hanging items, I made my way into the room. The dust looked undisturbed. Finally, I could return upstairs and go to bed. The light turned off with pop. I let out a little squeak of surprise. Clutching the gun, I desperately tried to make out anything in the dark. It was hopeless. Then I heard it. What sounded like the soft exhale of air. Dread crept up my back. Again, a soft exhale. Extremely close to me. I was sweating buckets. My legs started to tremble. The room is empty, I told myself. It is just your imagination. Exhale. Calmly walk back to the stairs. There's nothing down here. And if there was, you would fuck it up. Gentle caress of cold air on my neck shattered my bravado. I ran for the stairs. Things crashed all around me. I scrambled over idle items. I imagined the icy hands of some long-dead monster racing for me. Crashed into the concrete wall. Where the fuck are the stairs? My shin collided with something hard, sending a bolt of pain up my leg. I fell over, landing on the bottom step. Frantically, I crawled to the top. Sliding on the tile floor, I kicked the door shut behind me. I was a mess. My hair was filled with cobwebs and my breathing was coming in ragged gasps. Stomping over to the kitchen drawer, and I pulled out a flashlight. Next, I turned on every downstairs light. I opened the basement door, flashlight in one hand and gun in the other. The room was as empty as before. With a false sense of bravery, I checked the rest of the basement. It was empty. It had been so real in the dark. I checked the ancient bulb. It was burnt out rather than turned off. Finally, after multiple checks, I settled down in my bed for the night. It took me a long time to fall asleep. Allison and I are working nights pretty steadily now. Things are continuing to be weird. Just this morning, evening, night shift. So around 5 p.m. today, I was heading to my car to go to work when I noticed something. The neighbor's house looked off. Front door stood open. Paint looked aged. I would have guessed it was 10 or more years old, rather than 2 years I knew it to be. I hadn't paid much mind, but now that I looked, the driveway was cracked and the lawn a mess of tall weeds. The place seriously stood out on the street of manicured lawns. I didn't have much time to worry about it. The last thing I wanted to do was be late for my shift. Allison got in the car and we made the short drive to the call center. The next day, I paid more attention to the neighbor's house. Someone must have reported them to the HOA, because the place looked totally transformed. They must have gotten the work done while we were sleeping the day away. Work has been a total drain. Just this shift, we had a raccoon in a delivery truck. Mime twins skipping down the street, pinching people while holding hands. Voices coming from a storm drain. And just now, a call from a parent that claimed a peeping Tom had been looking in their daughter's window. Except, when the squad car arrived, they found the window was on the second floor with nothing near it. Unless he had a ladder that left no marks, or had Spider-Man, his was up the wall, there was just no way a pale-faced man had been grinning through the window. Regardless, there would be extra patrols in the area for the next 2 nights. Speaking of which, the police department hired 2 more officers. They were finally nearing full strength again. Hopefully, there won't be any more bridge incidents. That's not what I'm here to post about. Allison had to meet with a sketch artist at the police station, so we had driven to work separately. It seemed like the perfect time to see just how long Jordan stayed at work, and maybe see where he went afterwards. Sitting in the car was incredibly boring. I nearly nodded off a couple times. I was mid-text with Dean when Jordan finally stepped out of the building. It was 2 hours into day shift. In comparison, Nick never stayed more than a minute or 2 past his shift's end. Jordan walked north into town. I had never noticed because he was always there before me and left after. But Jordan didn't seem to drive to work, not even in our wet winter months. I would have to be careful trailing him. Honestly, he was the most boring person to follow. He entered the grocery store. I stayed 3 lots away. He left with a paper bag. He sat on a park bench for a bit looking at his phone. Then to my surprise, he entered the bar. Casually walked in myself. I was there often enough I figured I would blend right in. I was wrong. Jordan sat at a booth facing the door. He had a deadpan look on his face. He gave me the come hither finger. I obliged. It was the polite thing to do. I sat across from him before my butt had made comfortable contact with the seat. Jordan spoke. "What are you doing, Kylie?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Just going about town. Came here for a drink." "What brings you here?" Jordan's eyes bored into me. "Would your actions today have anything to do with you looking at things on my desk?" I suddenly felt too warm. I knew I was blushing and it sucked. I could never lie very well. I needed a pen. I lied. Jordan looked annoyed. "Cut the crap, Kylie. Are you with them or just dumb?" I was both insulted and confused by his question. "Screw you, Jordan. You and your dumb book of names." I stood to leave, but he grabbed my wrist. It hurt. "Watch yourself, Kylie. The best thing you can do is get out before things get bad." I ripped my hand free. I stared at him as I massaged my wrist. Front door banged open loudly. 2 men in buzz cuts strode in like a pair of roosters. Their military look might throw some people off, but nearly half the residents in Greenbrier sported buzz cuts as boys and ponytails as girls. And they all drove nearly identical Tahoes, Explorers and Chargers without tabs on the plates. It was kind of an unspoken bit of knowledge that they all worked at the building in the woods, even if they denied it when asked. Jordan stood and stepped past me. This close, I noticed he hadn't shaved today. His entire appearance was a bit more ragged than normal. "Listen, Kylie, I don't hate you. Just the thing you represent. You know what to do." With that, he left. I was more confused now than ever before. The bar continued to fill despite the early hour. I wasn't in a mood for whatever morning celebration was starting, so I went home. "I'm really confused, guys." Jordan's face wasn't just unshaved, which is unusual. There was no cut on his cheek. The truth behind that story is disturbing, but nothing prepares you for the terror awaiting in this next one. Curse of grief. Do you believe in curses? I didn't consider myself a superstitious person. I didn't believe in the paranormal and generally considered the ramblings of superstition to be more like modern mythology. People just taking allegories of concepts and held beliefs and trying to give them solid meaning and agency by attaching some force to it that moves beyond the belief of what our own eyes can see. Recent events, though, have forced me to reconsider my beliefs on the paranormal. What I have come to learn and to fear is that not believing in superstition might not change how it can affect you. Despite not believing this sort of thing myself, I might have to start. I think I might be cursed. Silly thing for a skeptic to say, I know, but I will tell you the story of the last few days, and maybe you can tell me if it sounds like I am or not. Maybe I am just being paranoid. The tragedy of recent events, having drowned my skeptical mind in a wave of the paranormal beliefs of others, though I fear the nagging feeling that it could be real. If this is all real, then I think I am in trouble. 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend Heather and I were on the way to a somber event. It was the funeral service of her best friend Gwen, and she was trying her best to compose herself, but having a hard time. "I don't know if I can do this," she said for the third time since we had departed, her sleeve wet with tears before we had even arrived. I tried my best to comfort her, but she was taking the loss of her friend hard. "It will be okay, honey. I know it's hard, all of this has been, but I know she would have wanted you to be there to remember her, along with all her other friends and family." I told her that, not really knowing if it was true, since I did not know much about her friend Gwen before she had passed so suddenly. I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder, without diverting too much attention from driving through the light traffic in the small town the service was held at. "I know, I just can't believe she is gone," she said while wiping her eyes a final time as we arrived at the funeral home. It was a gloomy day outside. Clouds shrouded any possible rays of sunshine. The sky threatened rain, yet was not quite ready to unleash the downpour. Very fitting day for a funeral, I thought to myself, and I opened Gwen's door and helped her out of the car. We stepped out and saw a large group of people in dark-colored clothes gathered near the entrance. Moving towards the group, Heather noticed Gwen's parents and suppressed another sob. I tried to reassure her again, and we moved to greet them and express our condolences. It was tough seeing the pained resolve on their faces as many cried around them, but they did their best to stay composed and thank each person for coming. The service had not started yet, but apparently the viewing had. We were told to head inside and to pay our respects and view the body if we wished, or to just write a memorial note. Heather decided she was feeling strong enough to go to the viewing, and I held her hand as we entered. There were others there softly crying or solemnly looking on in quite respect. 2 individuals caught my eye, though. I supposed Gwen's family was religious, but these 2 looked a bit extreme. They were wearing some sort of religious regalia and holding crucifixes. They seemed to hold them up and mutter some sort of prayer. Not too odd if they were priests or something, but it got strange when I heard something whispered quietly about how the Lord banishes all evil, and through his light we ask for an end to this bloody reaping. We pray for forgiveness. The robed figures finished the chant and made the sign of the cross one last time and left the body and the viewing room, looking back at us as they left in an oddly paranoid way, like they did not trust something about us being in the room. I brushed it off, and Heather did not seem to notice or care about the strange priests or whatever they were, or the weird sermon about evil they seemed to have had with her friend's body. We approached the coffin slowly, and Heather began crying again. I looked down into the finely carved casket and saw her. The embalming process always alters the look of people, no matter how skilled they are. It's just not quite them anymore. I felt terrible for Heather and how she lost her friend, and I felt even worse for Gwen. To have a heart attack at 34 was a genuine tragedy. She had had no underlying health issues of note and lived a fairly active and healthy lifestyle, so it was even more puzzling to everyone who had known her. I had been holding Heather's hand. As we stepped closer, she broke away and reached down and touched the hand of her friend and said her last goodbye. I looked on and felt moved by the touching scene and felt a shade of the deep sadness that she had felt for her lost friend. In my sympathetic reverie, I received a sudden flash of deep and profound sadness, which I thought made sense. What I was not prepared for was what felt like a strange, buzzing tension in the air, and a feeling of unbridled anger, like when a furious person is staring someone else down. I looked over my shoulders and across the room, but no one else was in there with us at that moment. Then I felt a strange pain in the back of my ears, almost like they were suddenly ready to pop. It felt very strange, but I had no idea what was happening. I was just standing there unmoving, looking at Heather, hold her friend's hand and say her goodbye. Then I noticed her hand and saw something disturbing. As Heather held Gwen's right hand, I noticed what may have been an oversight, by the makeup and mortuary workers who are supposed to prepare the bodies for viewing. There were fairly pronounced scratches in irregular patterns on the top portions of her fingers. They were initially hard to see, but were definitely there, down about halfway on each digit. I had a strange fancy that they brightened and thrummed in time with the disturbing feeling in the air, and I did not like the weird synchrony. I moved closer to try and put a hand on Heather's shoulder, but suddenly the bubble popped, and the pressure in my head exploded, as it felt like both my eardrums popped, and the blinding headache almost made me cry out. Before I could, though, I heard Heather cry out first, not in grief, but in pain. She was startled out of her own grieving by the pain of something, and she clutched her own right hand and looked down at a small but deep cut on her right index finger. It was bleeding a good bit for how small it seemed, and I quickly grabbed some tissues nearby and helped her cover it. What happened? Was there something sharp left in her casket? I asked her, while still holding her hand and trying to steady her. I don't know, there was nothing there. I was just holding her hand. Her poor hand. Whoever did her makeup and preparation should be ashamed. She hated that color, and whatever it was in there cut her hand as well. Heather responded, looking on the verge of crying again, and trying to distract her grief with temporary anger over the thought of her best friend's preparation not being perfect. We both saw another group waiting to enter and realized our time was up, so we exited the viewing room. I was able to get a Band-Aid and the car's first aid kit for Heather's cut. By that time, it had stopped bleeding, even though it looked disturbingly deep. I bandaged it anyway and disinfected it just to be safe, and Heather let out another whimper of pain. I apologized profusely, and we composed ourselves and went to the main hall for the ceremony. The main service was set to start in about 20 minutes. We never sat for the service. We had to leave about 10 minutes later. We were settled in, and I thought we would be okay, but I heard Heather quietly mumble, "Not now, not now." I asked her if she was all right, and she groaned in pain again and held a hand to her forehead. "No, not right now. I can't do it. I need to go. We need to go." She stood up, grabbed my arm, and we left. Not too many people noticed us leaving, since we were close to the back, but I shot an apologetic look at those who did. Rushing through the hall, I noticed the robbed figures again, and they seemed to regard Heather and I with a new apprehension, and they cleared out of our way and crossed themselves as we moved quickly down the hall and past them. We moved quickly since Heather was pulling me along, but as we departed, I thought I heard one of them say something in Latin or something. It sounded like maledictionum. We rounded the corner, and I realized where she had been rushing. She had made it to the restroom and promptly went in, and I heard vomiting, followed by sobbing, and then the sink running, and the door opening again. It's a migraine, right now of all times. It is so bad I can barely see straight, and I puked at Gwen's funeral. I can't believe this. We can't stay, we have to go. I can't do this now. I said my goodbye to her. We have to go. I am so sorry, Gwen, Heather said while she continued to cry and clutch her head. I held her arm and we quickly moved back out to the car and headed home. On the way home, the sky finally decided to open up and a torrential rain began. Despite the pounding of the rain on the car, I could not hear much over Heather's anguished moaning. I did not know what was worse for her at that moment, the migraine or the sadness over her friend. Yet despite the professed agony of the migraine, she seemed to be holding her hand like it was still wounded, and in particular, the finger that had been cut in Gwen's casket. I thought it was strange, but she seemed to writhe in pain like that small cut hurt worse than her migraine. I was so distracted by the scene I almost rear-ended a car in front of me, and I had to slam on the brakes. I apologized to Heather and asked if she was okay, but just held her hand on her face and did not seem to notice the jarring stop we had come to. Something was off. She was normally terrified of traffic and driving in the rain, but barely noticed when we almost got into a crash. We arrived home and Heather went straight to bed and fell into a fitful sleep. Outside, the rain had become a full thunderstorm and was raging, strong winds picking up as well. I was afraid the power might go out, so I started looking for some candles or flashlights. The twilight hour mixed with the pressing storm gave the outside look a disturbing, hellish red quality. It seemed an eerie nightcap to the day's disturbing and sad events. Heather had stayed asleep, and I was about to join her when I heard screaming from upstairs, and I rushed up to check on her. Heather was bolt upright, panting and heaving and clutching her hand. She started whimpering and saying, "I'm sorry, Gwen. I am sorry, I didn't know. Not us. Please, not us." Over and over. I sat down and reached across the bed to try and comfort her. But when I touched her shoulder, she whirled around and struck my hand, and for a moment she had a distorted and deranged appearance on her face. The next second she recovered and looked confused and horrified that she had just struck me, and proceeded to apologize repeatedly to me, and then back to Gwen again. I had no idea what was going on, but I was getting worried about her mental health. As she finally settled back down, she rolled over and fell back asleep. And I tried to settle in and ignore that nagging feeling. Something was very wrong. I know everyone grieves differently, but the way she had been acting was worrying. I hoped that tomorrow would be better. I was about to drift off when I heard a disturbing sound that made my stomach turn. It sounded sort of like fingernails cutting into skin. It was faint at first, but eventually I realized it was coming from Heather, and I sat up and hopped out of bed and slowly moved around to her side to get a look at her prone form, rolled over facing the opposite way. To my horror, she still seemed asleep, but was unconsciously scratching deep cuts into her right middle finger with the nails on her left. The old cut had been opened as well, and her hand was bleeding profusely again. "Oh my God, Heather, wake up!" I shouted and shook her shoulders, and she woke with a scream. Before she knew what was happening, I had a towel in hand and was covering her bleeding fingers. "What happened?" I thought I was asleep. She mumbled out in a dazed, a dreamy-sounding voice, seemingly oblivious to any pain caused by the self-mutilation. I had no idea how she had not known she was doing that, or how she couldn't feel it. She was showing a disturbing degree of dissociation since she had come back from the funeral, and I was worried she might be having a mental breakdown. I brought some first aid supplies and went to clean her wounds. When I went to disinfect and bandage her fingers, I saw an odd and seemingly deliberate pattern that had been carved onto the fingertips. I don't know how, but it looked disturbingly familiar. I took a picture of the morbid design and tried showing it to her. When I showed her the work she had done to her own finger, she merely said, "Oh, that's what that was." Then, as if uninterested by the conversation, she fell asleep again. Nothing about this was right. I needed to see what was happening with Heather. The next day was worse, and Heather woke up with a very high fever. I tried to give her medicine for it, and she seemed weirdly mistrustful and would slap the Tylenol out of my hands and stare at me as if I had just tried to kill her. "I know what you are trying to do. I know," she muttered, though not looking at me when she spoke. Despite the accusation and look, she seemed to be talking to herself or someone else and not me. I decided to call her parents and see if they could talk to her and help. It was strange, though, since the line seemed to be dead when I called on both of our phones. I called her sister as well, and no answer. It was getting weirder and weirder. The storm had hardly abated outside, and I was concerned about leaving Heather in this state and venturing out into the tempest to get her help. She lay on the couch, feverish and rambling, and staring weirdly at her hands for minutes at a time. I tried to let her rest, but as the storm picked up outside, I saw her visibly sweating, and I took her temperature, and it was 105 degrees. I had to get her fever down, so I tried to wake her to take some medicine and run a cool shower for her. Heather's eyes blinked open, and a hazy look had glossed over her entire face as she sat up and struck me in the head, knocking down the offered medicine again. "Not again, not again, no more, not upon us." She started ranting and screaming at me. I tried to calm her down, but she hurled a nearby chair at me, and I had to flee the living room and run upstairs while trying to talk to her and de-escalate. Despite my attempts at reaching her, she did not seem to be listening to me or anyone in the room, just some other perceived being. She seemed to be alternating between directing her fury at something, then apologizing to it. "Why did you leave? Why did you do this to me? It's not fair. Why her?" Why me? She screamed ever louder until falling silent and collapsing on the floor. I needed help. Something was very wrong. I did not know if this was a psychotic break or if the fever had addled her into a violent frenzy. But she needed help now, so I dialed 911 and called an ambulance. Mercifully, I got through and was able to call for help. After hanging up the phone, I looked back where I expected the prone form of Heather, only to find her bolt upright and carving her right hand with a kitchen knife. It was those creepy lines. She had slashed them on her remaining fingers and was holding up her hand in a bloody spectacle as if checking her work. She looked at me with a deranged smile that shifted to an agonized look of pure despair and said, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Her, me, you, all of it. It is all going to end. No stopping it now." The air in the room became heavy, and the pressure in my head reminded me of how I felt when we were viewing Gwen at the service. My head ached, my teeth hurt, and I sat there paralyzed with dread, watching Heather hyperventilate and look at her ruined hand, until suddenly the air swept out of the room and my eardrums burst. Heather fell to the floor. Her eyes were open and she was not breathing. I held her hand and tried to perform CPR on her, yet to no avail. She was dead before emergency services arrived. I sat in disbelief next to her lifeless form, holding her hand and crying. I was in utter shock. How could she have died? When the EMTs arrived, they tried to resuscitate, but were unsuccessful. It was declared as a cardiac failure. That was all they could surmise as for what could have killed her. A heart attack, just like Gwen. When they moved her away and placed her on the gurney, I felt a sharp pain on my hand, and I realized that her nails must have scratched my finger or something. As I looked down at my right index finger and saw a bloody line formed near the top down past the nail in a disturbing pattern, caught my eye. I was barely able to give my statement over the blinding headache I had developed. Despite the shock, grief, and general horror of the events that unfolded before me, I was suddenly very tired. When the emergency services had left, I felt so overwhelmed by the tragedy of what I had experienced that I collapsed into a heap on the couch and passed out. I had horrible dreams while I slept. Gwen and Heather out under the red stormy sky, calling to me. I felt the terrible pressure in the air and that feeling of unbridled anger. I saw flashes of the strange priests and the word they whispered, maledictionem. That was last night. When I awoke from the horrible dreams, I came to a disturbing realization. This cut, it is like the cut that Heather had. She held Gwen's hand, and in a few days, she was dead as well. I don't know what the hell is happening, but I am even more disturbed by the word that those priests spoke, maledictionem. It turns out it was Latin after all, and what it roughly translates to is curse. I can scarcely believe it. Does this mean they thought this is some sort of death curse? No, that's impossible. I'm just letting the grief and trauma of the last few days color my reality with nonsense. Yet as I write this, my head is getting foggy again, and I fear what will happen to me next. Grief can make us experience terrible things. It can drive us mad, and it can reap a physical toll. I know it's grief over losing her in such a terrible way. I can't believe she is gone. I can't physically cope, that's all. I am destroyed emotionally, but I will be okay. Curses can't be real? No, the grief is real. I will manage. Everything will be okay, somehow. Sorry, I will need to update everyone another time. I need to clean myself up. I managed to get a terrible paper cut on my middle finger, and it is bleeding a lot. It's funny, I never thought a paper cut could look so strange. It almost matches the other scratch, and it looks oddly familiar. But the screams don't stop there. The next tale will haunt you long after you've heard it. Point Nemo is the furthest point from land on Earth. I spent 6 months on a research rig there. It's lonely out on the ocean, especially at night when the only light you have is from the stars and your own weak light. The darkness comes in, pressing everything and taking over like a scourge. Nothing but pure black on a cloudy night. I thought I had seen the worst isolation the world could offer working at Palmer Station in the Antarctic. At least it wasn't as cold out here at Point Nemo, I guess. Furthest point on Earth from any land in every single direction. Point Nemo might be one of the most remote locations on Earth. The population of 0, most of the time at least. There's a small research rig out there, not quite as big as an oil platform, but decent enough size. I got an offer a couple of years back to go out there and do some studies on the ocean biology out there. Since Nemo is so remote, with relatively stagnant currents, there's a surprising lack of biological life out. Honestly, it was exciting just for the chance to say, I've been to one of the most secluded places on Earth. Getting to study the biome and sea life that was there, though? Goddamn, I was over the moon. Ecstatic was the understatement of the damned century. I arrived on the platform, a couple of clicks away from the actual point, geographically, early in the morning. Clear skies were reflecting off gentle waves in every direction. The deep blue of the ocean here was beautiful, virtually unmarred by human intervention. If anything else, I got some time to read in relative solitude while I was off duty. There were 5 of us at the station. An older guy called Flam was the lead researcher. I don't know how he got the name either. There were 2 assistant researchers. Shannon, a woman in her mid-30s, and Hap, a younger man with a specialty in deep-sea biology. The last person was a mechanic, Sandy, who made sure the everyday maintenance of the rig was maintained. I was the happiest bitch in the world, stepping off the chopper and meeting everyone, getting the full tour of the base, including the rec room, gym, mess hall, 3 separate labs, and a surprisingly cozy library. Everyone was nice enough, though Flam was a little neurotic, to say the least. Probably important to mention how this place was set up. If you've ever seen a free-floating oil rig, it's a lot like that, just without the ecological destruction. Think of it like a very large ship supported by pontoons, with some parts extending under the water with a larger building up top. What you would call the ground floor is the mess hall, rec room, and gym, with the labs on top and the library nestled in the center of them. Our barracks were below sea level, extending it down with the maintenance area underneath housing generators, gas, etc. It was a nice place, all things considered. Cabin in the middle of the ocean, basically. Settling in that first night was rough. Sleeping underwater essentially was a little terrifying, kind of claustrophobic, and completely fucking nauseating. Despite the large pontoons holding us up, the waves still rocked us, making me feel my welcome dinner warming up for an encore as I swayed. Sandy came walking through, going to the shared bathroom between our rooms. "You all right, Ellie?" she asked, looking concerned. All I could do was shake my head, making the nausea take hold harder in the process. Oh God. She was watching while I puked into a trash can. Hell of a way to make new friends, Ellie. I was surprised when she walked over and grabbed my loose hair, holding it back, rubbing my back with her other hand, gently soothing me as I evacuated everything I ate today. All good. Happens to everyone on the first day. "Please tell me it gets better," I said, gasping for breath and only getting the stench of vomit back. "Oh yeah, just need to adjust. Come on up to the deck and get some air though, it helps." She led me up, walking single file on the narrow staircase. I bumped my shoulders countless times, unsteadied by the surf moving us. At one point I started falling back, losing my balance and reaching out to steady myself, but only swiped the empty wall. Suddenly her hand darted out, grabbing my forearm and steadying me. She pulled me back to the step, making sure I was upright before moving further, now holding on to my hand as guidance. Soon she was chuckling. "Hope you're better above deck than you are below." "You and me both." I gagged again, just trying to talk, my head still spinning. Fresh salt air when we emerged from the outer door onto the wraparound platform was like opening a valve for me. I was taking in the deepest breaths I could, finally clearing out the vomit smell stuck in my nose. She leads me over to the platform railing, dark night settling in around us. I was immediately distracted from my nausea by the beauty in the sky above. There were a decent amount of clouds covering the sky, but what wasn't covered was some of the most amazing stargazing I had ever been privy to. Every single constellation was clearly definable beyond the clouds, with a full moon shining through, sending light in patches to reflect off the water. An infinite sea of stars in every direction. It was beautiful. Something that's only on par with seeing the northern lights in their full glory as far as I've seen. Even in the imposing dark out at Point Nemo, millions of points of light shone through. "What's that?" I said, noticing movement against the water. First, it looked like the shadow from a cloud passing over, disturbing the stars below. Then a cloud moved from in front of the moon, casting bright light down in all directions. I could see clearly that it wasn't a shadow, but a giant, walking through the ocean step by step. From the distance, it was maybe 5 clicks out. Even then, I could make out its features of it clearly thanks to the size. It towered larger than a skyscraper. By my best estimate, each leg had water reaching up to around the knee. It honestly looked like it was going to break the clouds with its head, but it paid no mind as it whipped them away. Oh my God. I was speechless. I don't know if Sandy was too, but she was staring off into the distance alongside me. If she was shocked, nothing showed on her face, but there was the faintest of smiles hiding underneath. Your guess is as good as mine, science girl, Sandy replied. I could see clearer now that more were walking behind it, heading to the west of us in a straight path. We'll need to go downstairs before the waves reach us, though. Sucks for this to happen on your first night. What? You've seen this before? I asked, still not tearing my eyes away. The giants were humanoid in build, just like massive versions of people. Their faces were a little more odd. Eyes were larger than normal proportions, and there was a smile on their small mouths that looked like the head was deflating from the bottom like a balloon. Didn't even realize I was shouting when I started talking to her again, gesturing at the Goliaths waiting by. They're massive. How is something this big physically possible? This completely disregards every single law of physics. I just run the machines. She shouted back. Come on, let's go inside before we get completely soaked. Oh God. Now I could see what she meant. Every step they took was sending waves our way, crashing into each other as rambling gates tried to overtake each other. Sea foam was high in the air, and at one point, while backing up to the door, I swear I felt the water spray from overhead like a spring shower. One of them turned, looking directly at me. I swear my heart stopped, breath catching as I caught a full view of the face. I was frozen, paralyzed that it was going to come for me now. Just pick me up and pop me in its mouth like a damn snack before dinner. The deflated smile just kept on, now widening to show toothless gums. I could hear Sandy behind me, yelling to come with her, and that we were in danger, but I couldn't break eye contact with the giant. Something ancient was holding me in place, frozen and waiting to be devoured. Then Sandy pulled me back, still trembling at the behemoths as they walked away to whatever strange destination would host them. The door was barely closed, but I could still see the one who was looking at me as it turned to follow the others, massive waves sloshing our way as it came. Suddenly Sandy braced her and me both against the wall, holding on. Forward, I said, now looking her right in the eye as my hands pressed into the narrow wall behind her. I was still trembling, elbows refusing to stay still, as I pushed against the wall harder. Not going to lie, though, she was a much better sight to be face to face with than the giants. Sorry, you'll thank me, she said, barely finishing the sentence before the entire base was hit hard, turning into a steep angle that sent me falling forward into her even more. Another wave hit, bouncing us briefly into the air as we braced ourselves, trying not to fall down the tight staircase. We tilted back, standing upright once more, though swaying heavily, now back to a calmer sea. Best to get back to our rooms before the next patch hits. We scurried back quickly, nausea coming back to me. I couldn't tell if it was that or the contact we just had that was making me warm, blushing as we walked into the small hallway adjoining our rooms. I sat on my bunk, looking at her still standing in the doorway. What are those things? I wanted a straight answer, though I don't know if she had one. Like, they were giants. I get that, but what the fuck did I just see? Beats me. None of us have been able to figure it out. She shrugged, leaning against the doorway now. You'll see a lot of weird shit out here. Don't know if the others told you that up front, but they're a bunch of hardcore skeptics anyway. So they've seen it too and didn't think they should maybe tell the new girl about it? What if I was out there alone? I would have died. I was almost screaming, now terrified at the proposition of spending 6 months here. Please, they try to tell me it's a trick of the light and isolation. Hell, I thought maybe I was going crazy, but you've helped me out big time here. I finally have a second witness, she said, raising her hands in exasperation. Goddamn, feels gratifying to not be gaslit into thinking I'm losing my damn mind. I imagine, I said, trying to calm down and not get too overwhelmed this far in. My nausea was still beating at me, making my gag reflex go wild again. This time I'm not entirely sure it was the waves causing it though. I was still coming to grips with seeing fucking giants walking through the ocean. Not to mention the existential dread it was causing was worse than I've felt since grad school. She sat down beside me, handing over the trash can once more. Another huge wave rocked us, sending me flying forward into the wall. I don't know. Think maybe since this place is so far from people that it's where old things go to hide or be alone, though some of these things should be left well enough alone, she said, picking me up as the second wave rocked us back. Nothing I've found too dangerous, though, so we've got some peace of mind. God, if that's considered not dangerous, I'm afraid to see what else there is, I said, curling up in my bunk and pulling my knees to my chest. I was still warm, with the ventilation on the station feeling more like stale air being fed back through. She only smiled back, giving me a brief goodnight before heading into her room and closing her door. It took me hours to drift off. Waves kept assailing us through the night, and eventually I tied myself to the bunk using my blanket to at least try to stay in place. Unfortunately, it didn't do anything for the nausea, which came and went all night. Every few minutes a smaller wave would rock us, making me fear that one of those things was on their way to stomp us into the depth. Finally, almost asleep, their faces stared me down from behind my eyelids, like the balloons deflating, or even just ready to pop right from their bulging eyes as they just smiled away. Those eyes had something behind them, not malice. At least I don't think so. Apathy might have been more fitting. Every time I remember the one that looked at me, making eye contact with pupils the size of cruise ships, it was like a god studying an ant. I was just a bug in their environment, no better than something they would step on during their journey. Moving on without guilt. How old does something have to be to get that big? Could these things be older than any of the history we've discovered yet? Good God, my mind wouldn't let me sleep almost as much as the nausea. It was the early hours of the morning before I was finally out, and thank fuck the others must have seen I was exhausted, though only Sandy knew it wasn't just because of the waves. When I got up the next morning, still groggy as hell and searching desperately for the coffee pot, I noticed we had portholes along the outer walls of the living quarters. Maybe it was just too dark to notice before, but after finally getting coffee in my system, I decided to take a look out, at least to assure myself the ocean outside wasn't out to get me. Everything we knew about Point Nemo so far was that it was a lifeless, the most part, stretch of the ocean. Even just looking at the sun filtering through the water is relaxing for me, so I had hope. Pulling up a chair, I settled in next to the window. Thanks to the shallow depth, it was large enough to get a good view all around, and even bubbles out of the side a little so you have some peripheral vision. Small strands of sunlight piercing the surface finally gave me some soothing relaxation setting in. I was drifting off, gazing out into the blue wonder when it opened. If it was one of the giants, I'm not entirely sure. A huge eye was staring me down through the porthole. Two irises meeting in the middle of it to pierce right through the porthole and through me. I felt the same primal fear that had set in the night before, but this wasn't like the giant. I felt malice in this, studying the entire base, like we were the ones being researched. It didn't hit me until a moment later how massive it must have been, only the deep yellow surrounding the irises to tell me how far away this leviathan was. Despite the distance, I could make out every feature. The depths welcome you. I didn't hear it necessarily. It was like an intrusive thought entering my mind as the irises pulsated, dilating to get a better look at me. Primal fear set in again, telling every nerve in my body to run. Too bad there's nowhere to run in the middle of the ocean. Don't look at it. Sandy was suddenly beside me, snapping the cover shut on the porthole with a quick slam. I was back, the chill still working its way down my back as I came back to the dry confines of the base. Just don't look at it. It says some awful things, she said, now looking me right in the eyes, more serious than I'd seen her even with the giants. That thing is different from the others. I've only ever seen the eye, but I don't know. I think making eye contact with it is like an invitation. Just don't do it, to be safe. I didn't even have words at this point. I was one day in, already with most of my assumedly broad knowledge and understanding of the world in shambles. Everything I was here for felt secondary. Pointless research on algae and ocean bacteria, when I might as well have seen a god just hours ago. My anxiety and existential dread were vying for control of every brain cell, and I was the only loser here. Giants were simple, honestly, though I can feel the chill of empty ocean spray to this day, freezing my bones at the thought. If they were the extent of what I saw, would have been fine. Nothing normal in the middle of the ocean, though. The 6 months I spent there felt like they alternated between blissful dreams and the worst fever nightmares I've ever had. That was merely the beginning. Now, let's delve into a mystery that's even more horrifying. The god that had forgotten it started with a whisper, buried on the cold autumn wind that howled through the trees. No one could say when it began, exactly. Some claimed it was older than memory itself. Others said it had been born the night the stars flickered out for an hour, decades ago. But those who heard the whisper never spoke of it for long. They either disappeared or went mad, their minds shattered by something they couldn't explain. I was never one for old stories, but when I found the journal tucked away in my grandfather's attic, something about the worn pages made my hands shake. It smelled like mold and damp earth, and the ink was smeared in places as if tears or rain had fallen on it. The title scrawled on the first page was almost unreadable. God that had forgotten. The entries were bizarre. Dated from nearly 50 years ago, long before I was born. They spoke of strange dreams, landscapes twisted and wrong, where the sky was always dark and shadows moved without light. There were pages filled with sketches of a figure, human almost, but not quite. Its face was blurred, like it was being erased as he drew it. The most chilling part was the description that followed. The god that had forgotten itself still lingered, wandering through the corners of reality like a broken thought. My grandfather's handwriting grew more erratic as the entries went on, his words frantic and desperate. He wrote of hearing voices at night, whispers from the dark corners of his room, telling him things no human should know. It remembers now, one line read, and it's looking for those who heard its name. By the final entry, the words were almost illegible. Found me. It remembers everything. I shut the journal and tried to forget about it. I didn't tell anyone, not even my friends, but the dreams started almost immediately after that. At first, they were just flickers, images of that dark, twisted landscape. But soon, they became longer, more vivid. I was walking through endless forests where the trees seemed to bend and twist in ways that hurt my mind to look at. In the distance, I always saw that same figure, standing just on the edge of my vision, watching. Then the whispers began. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, hearing faint voices calling my name. First, I thought it was my imagination, but the more I ignored them, the louder they became, until they seemed to echo in every corner of my house. And always, the same words. It remembers. Coming. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Every night, I felt it closer. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of it in the mirror, just a blur of a figure behind me before I turned around, and it was gone. Other times, I would wake up to find things in my room had been moved, small things like the lamp or a book. But the worst was the feeling that something was watching me, something that had forgotten what it once was, but now knew it wanted me. I searched through the journal again, desperate for answers, but it gave none. There were only vague warnings, cryptic notes about rituals and ancient names. Nothing concrete, nothing that could help me. And then 2 nights ago, I heard it in the house. It started as a faint creaking, like footsteps just outside my door. I froze, listening as the sound grew closer, each step deliberate, dragging. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. And then the whisper came again from the other side of the door, clear as day. I remember you. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. I don't know how much longer I have before it comes for me, before it takes me like it took my grandfather. But there's something I've realized, something terrifying. The god that had forgotten, it wasn't just some entity drifting through dreams. It was once worshipped long ago when the world was younger and humanity still feared the dark. People gave it offerings, prayed to it for mercy, but eventually they stopped. Its temples crumbled, its name faded. It was forgotten. But gods don't die. Not truly. They linger, waiting, desperate to be remembered. And now that it remembers itself, it's looking for those who forgot. If you've read this far, it's already too late. The whispers will come soon, and you'll hear it call your name. It remembers you now, just like it remembers me. But what follows next is not for the faint of heart. If you dare, continue with me into this new tale of terror. There's a monster in my diner. When you're in the zone, you don't have to think much. Big, bright, "Hi, what can I get you?" Post the ticket to the kitchen. Grab whatever is ready at the window and sling it onto the table. Hi. Ticket, plate. Hi, ticket, plate. Rinse and repeat for several hours and then you're done, feet aching and hopefully $100 in tips in your pocket. I did take one break usually, mid-morning. I'd wolf down breakfast and then hide in the toilet for 8 minutes to scroll on my phone. But otherwise, it wasn't a job where I could be on my phone much. Maybe later as the breakfast rush died down, but by that point I was usually tired and flagging anyway, and my attention was focused on not delivering plates to the wrong tables. So it was pretty odd to zone out and find myself standing behind the counter in full view of everyone, staring at my phone. I never took my phone out when I was on the floor, unless my mom called with an emergency or something. But when I came to, I looked at my screen and my lips went numb. I had my notes app open and had simply written, "That thing isn't human." If a friend had messaged me, I would have assumed it was a prank. But it was my notes app. I had written it. I had clearly just written it. I didn't remember doing so, which was odd, but the last couple of minutes were blur, and I didn't remember not doing it either. I was worried I was maybe having a stroke or something. I glanced around quickly and made eye contact with the cook, who said, "Order up," like he'd said it a few times already, and nudged a plate towards me. I grabbed it. The number 7 was for table 3. I turned around, and it was pretty quiet in the diner. I was getting close to the end of my shift. There were a couple of folks in booths and a couple of folks at the counter. I ran the food out to table 3, grabbed them a new bottle of ketchup, and then went to pick up the next order from the kitchen window. I froze. How had I not noticed the monster at the counter? It had a humanoid head, but that was where the resemblance to a human stopped. It had fleshy appendages. They were pinkish and looked like human skin. They were neatly folded up, some joints folding backwards like a bird's legs. But overall, it had fit itself quite compactly into a seat. It wasn't quite sitting as much as propped between the counter and the stool, its body not able to bend in the places a human's can. Overall, though, it looked to me kind of like a giant insect. Something about the limbs reminded me of a grasshopper or a praying mantis, the sharpness of the joints and the way they sat on its frame. The skin. I felt myself gagging, but then the cook, Pascal, was yelling insistently from the window to get my ass in gear. I grabbed the 3 plates on autopilot, balancing them on my arms, and hurried out to table 1. I stopped by each table and asked if they needed anything. The man in seat 2 at the counter asked for another glass of water, which I happily obliged. I turned my back to fill a glass at the soda fountain when I froze. How had I not noticed the man in seat 2 was a monster? He looked nothing like a man, except that he had flesh-like skin, but that was where the resemblance to a man ended. I had walked up like everything was normal and asked if it needed anything. It made a series of clicking noises. I remember saying, "No problem," in my customer service voice, like it was the most normal thing in the world, and walked over to pour a glass of water. I was panicking by this point. How could I not notice? Was it messing with my head? I came to when the cold water came spilling over the edge of the cup and splashed onto my hand. I reflexively pulled back. I dumped the extra water into the drip tray. I glanced back to see if the monster was there. I was holding a dripping glass of water for seat 2. I walked over to him and said, "Here you go. Holler if you need anything else," and moved to toss some menus at 2 guys who had just come in. I was bussing table 3 when I remembered I hadn't seen them leave. We're a tiny hole-in-the-wall place, 5 booths and 10 counter seats. There's a bell on the door. But I heard the bell. They left their food half-eaten. There was a monster in seat 2. I whipped my head around, but there was an older gentleman, maybe mid-40s, sipping his glass of water and pushing some potatoes around on his plate. I shook my head and laughed quietly to myself. I needed to finish my shift already. I wiped down the table and brought the bin to the kitchen. In the kitchen I had a meltdown when the memory of the monster hit me like a freight train. "Pascal, look at seat 2, whispered. He glanced over and back at me. "Old guy, what, he make a pass at you or something?" "No, he's not. I don't think he's human." I said, "Not human? He's a bug person, but I only remember when I'm not looking at him." "Okay," Pascal said. "Can you serve him food, even if he's a bug person?" I shook my head. "I can't go back out there. It's messing with my head." Pascal said, "You're tired. Let's get you some water. There's 20 more minutes until Sheila gets here and she'd take over." "Okay. Can you do 20 more minutes?" "No," I shouted. I ripped my arm away from Pascal, who had been patting my shoulder comfortingly. Our dishwasher had brought me a glass of water, but I slapped it out of his hand. "I'm not going back out there." "Okay," Pascal said. "I'm going to make a couple phone calls. Sit right there. Ramon, you're going to have to run a couple tables, okay?" He called the owner, who said I could leave of my own accord, or else they'd call an ambulance for me. I begged Ramon not to go out, but he gave me a wide berth. Pascal escorted me out the kitchen exit, next to the dumpsters. I got in my car and drove home, careful not to look in the windows of the diner. The owner called me the next day and told me I was fired, which was fine by me. I was never going back there. This was just a job to help pay for books while I worked my way through community college. I was already lining up a work study at the library. He did call me again a week later asking if I wanted to pick up a couple shifts, just a couple, until he could hire someone else. He was short-staffed, see? Pascal had walked out suddenly, and Sheila had no-showed 3 days in a row, and he couldn't get in touch with her at all. But as the darkness deepened, another chilling tale unfolded in a different corner of the world. Dark and twisted, the escape game you will never escape. Room number 1. Subscribe, Part 2. The inquisitive looks on everyone's faces as I arrived at the party made me want to hide. They looked at me with equal parts concern, pity, and curiosity as I made my way into the crowd, trying to locate the birthday boy so that I could say hi, spend the least amount of time I could without being rude, head home. It's been 4 months since I've gotten out of the psych ward, but I've managed to avoid most social events, pretending I needed to rest, so I'm not yet used to getting those looks. Matthew's birthday, however, I could not avoid. He's been my friend since kindergarten, and he's one of the few who came to visit me at the hospital. It was the worst possible return to a social life, though, as she would be there too. And before I could even spot Matthew, there she was, laughing with a friend, a drink in hand. Beautiful, warm, perfect. Her eyes met mine and her smile fell before returning in a slightly embarrassed, barely curving at the edges way. She waved. I waved back. I knew better than to try and talk to her. That was what got me into the psych ward in the first place. The girl I once knew, the woman I've loved for a decade, gone. I met Stella on my first day of college. She was dating my roommate, both of them elated to finally be out of their hometown, finally be where real life happened. She was sweet, she was cute, and so clearly in love that I often found myself wishing I had a girlfriend that loved me like she loved Andrew, which made it harder for me to keep my mouth shut when Andrew started taking home girls who were not Stella, a never-ending string of forgettable women who he somehow managed to talk into accepting being the other woman, all of them unaware that they were several to share this ugly title. I caved in right before Christmas break. When she came around with a homemade Advent Christmas calendar for, I told her the whole truth, watched her heart break in front of me, and while I felt terrible both for the pain I caused her and the hell I was putting myself through by having to endure the rest of the year living with someone who now hated me, I knew I was doing the right thing. And I gained a friend. Our bond created in the trust she now put in me. In this moment of shared vulnerability when I was the witness of her worst pain. We stayed friends through college, texting regularly, going for breakfast sometimes on Saturday morning, supporting each other through exams and failed dating experiment. I always knew what I felt for her was more than just friendship. What I did not expect, however, was for my feels to be reciprocated, and for her to lean in for a kiss at the graduation party. Feeling was exhilarating. Everything clicked into place. The right person, the right time, the right everything. The next 2 months were a blur of perfect moments. The smell of her skin, the smell of pancakes eaten in my bed, and the small studio I had gotten while I worked as a barista in the town near our campus. The smell of her cup of tea cooling down on the coffee table when I came home to her and found her sending resume after resume, doing interviews on Zoom, honing her LinkedIn profile. She was trying to find her first big girl job, as she said, just like I had done. My first day looming mid-September. Real life felt like a distant threat, something we could ignore for as long as we needed, something so vulgar and crude compared to our love that it didn't even feel real. It was mid-July when she finally got hired. She jumped into my arms when I got home from work, acting as if it was great news that she was leaving me for a job on the other coast, waiting for me to congratulate her as if my whole world wasn't shattering. "We can FaceTime," she said. "I'll come for Thanksgiving. You'll come for Christmas. We'll figure it out. It's just a first job. We'll make it work. It won't last forever," she begged. But I could not stand it. I could see it, clear as the day. The phone calls long and daily at first, but getting cut short more and more as we both got busy with our lives, our jobs, our new friends. The facet times making it more evident that my sunset was her dark sky, my dinner her late night snack, our watches always discordant. The slow, painful death of love, the goodbyes getting less and less poignant, the agonizing realization that building a life together would mean uprooting everything, for one of us or both of us. And so I ended it before it could die. I buried myself in work, in the gym, in new hobbies, new friends, new women. She was in the back of my head every minute of every day, but I had made the right decision. I was so sure of it. I had to be the brave one. I had to prevent more pain in the future for both of us. And while her naive, love conquers all mindset was touching, it was no match for the reality I knew I was avoiding for us. It was 5 years before we saw each other again. I wouldn't have come if I knew she was there. She was in town visiting a college friend, and one of our mutual friends invited her over for our monthly escape game night. We'd been doing that for over a year, finding a new escape game to try every month, getting burgers and beers afterward. It was fun and it helped us stay in touch. Though everyone wasn't available every month, this ritual meant we still got to see one another regularly. For that month's night out, only 3 of us in the group of us answered present. Tony, one of my best friends since childhood, the third element to our golden trio with Andrew, his fiancée, Ellie, and me. It was mid-October. Halloween was just around the corner. Going to an horror-themed escape game made sense, even though I never liked horror movies. I hate them even more now. Dark and twisted, the entrance said. It was an industrial building, slightly out of town. No decoration on the outside, no skeleton, no skull, no pumpkin. "It looks kind of cheap, doesn't it?" Tony said when we parked in front. "They've only been open for 2 weeks, babe. They're probably still working on it. The Google reviews are so good, though." Ellie answered, putting her hand through his hair as he started unbuckling his seatbelt. I was silent, staring right ahead at the silhouette standing in front of the building. "Della." "Yeah, dude, I know I should have told you, but come on, you would have bailed. Been 5 years. You guys can't keep avoiding each other. It's getting annoying. You know our wedding's coming up next year, too. So Ellie and I thought it would be better if you two saw each other beforehand so it wouldn't be awkward." Tony stopped as I shot him a dark look and opened the car door. This is going to be the worst night ever, I thought. Man, was I right. One awkward hug later, the 4 of us got in dark and twisted, and the horror began. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," a voice erupted from the dimly lit hallway. As our eyes got used to the obscurity, we started to discern a tall, meaty man with salt and pepper hair and a plump, rosy-cheeked redhead woman, both of them in their 50s or early 60s. "We're Connor and Molly," she said, almost chanting. Clearly it was an act they had rehearsed. and there was something deeply touching about that. "What are your names?" Connor shouted. His usual manner of communication, we would soon learn. Ellie, Stella, Tom, and Tony." "Hi." "Great, are you ready to play?" His Irish accent was thick as butter. Stella and I shared a look, and she smiled. The spark. Oh, the spark. It was still there. I needed to kill that shit now. I looked away, keeping my face as straight as I could as we started to follow Connor through a bright red corridor, Molly walking right after us. "All right, ladies and gentlemen, the rules are simple. 4 of you means you get access to 4 rooms. You cannot move to the next room before you've unlocked the previous one. You cannot walk back into the previous room once you've made it to the next. Any attempt to do so will be punished. If you don't unlock the next room before the countdown is up, you will stay trapped forever. You cannot escape if you do not respect the rules." There was something pathetic about his little act, like he was trying to be a bigger man than he was, and still could not make himself be intimidating despite his height and build. His top hat and black tailcoat looked cheap and did not fit him well. His face was warm and kind, gray mustache perking up at the edges. I guess we all wanted to be nice to him, so we overdid our enthusiasm. "All right, yeah, let's do this, team." We all high-fived, electricity sparkling in my palm as it touched Stella's for the first time in 5 years. Last time I held her hand, I thought, was when she was sitting in my bed, crying, begging me to give us a chance. I darted my eyes towards the floor, and when I looked up, here was Molly, looking at me fondly. She stepped closer, smiled, put one hand on my cheek, and whispered, "Good luck, dear, good luck." As Tony grabbed me by the shoulder and gave me gentle push towards my friends, who were entering the first room, I looked back at Molly, perplexed. Connor was putting his arm around her shoulders, his big smile already gone, a concerned look on his face. The corridor was too dark for me to be certain, but I swear I saw tears in Molly's eyes. First room. The first room was completely empty. Black walls everywhere, and nothing else. No furniture, no window, but most importantly, no door. The lights were crude, a shock after the obscurity of the hallway. The only decor was a countdown that showed we had 14,055s left. "Okay," Tony said, frowning. "What do we do now?" "I don't know, man. Let's check the walls." I shrugged. We picked a wall each and started looking for asperities, signs, hidden button, anything. No amount. It was infuriating at first, and after the first 5 minutes, it just became boring. Tony gave up first and went to Ellie, hugging her from behind. "This place is shit, babe. New. Come on, there must be something here. The reviews were great. It must be right before our eyes." She suddenly stopped, as right where Tony had touched the wall in front of them, a mirror appeared. But the way it appeared did not feel right. It did not come sliding up or down, or the wall turning to reveal it. No, it seemed like the wall turned into a mirror. 1 second a normal wall with badly applied black paint, the next a full-size mirror, floor to ceiling, and right as we took in this view, got entirely black. "What the oh my God!" Tony jumped back in fear as the mirror now showed, clear as the day, his own parent. I've known Tony's parents for years. Their house in North California had been our getaway place for the past decade or so. All the boys meeting up once a year to fish in the lake, grill on the terrace, and drink beers looking at the sunset on the mountain. They were kind, funny, disgustingly in love. High school sweethearts who would soon celebrate 45 years of marriage and who were so proud to see their son make big money in the Silicon Valley and about to marry his own high school sweetheart. In the mirror, though, Donald and Judy looked completely different. The same man I had a beer with a few months ago, discussing his son's upcoming wedding, who smiled at me and tapped my shoulder telling me my time would come too, was now glaring at his son, his face a picture of hatred and anger. Tony's mom was sobbing, standing a few steps back behind her husband. We found the letters in your box," she stuttered. Tony's face dropped. I'll never forget the look on his face. I had never seen him like that, and I've never seen him like that again. And for that, I am grateful. His father stepped closer. Even though he knew it was a mirror or a screen or whatever that was, Tony took a step back. His father seemed to struggle to find his words, his face getting redder and redder as he started shaking visibly. My son is not gay, so I don't know who you think you are. You are not my son. I never want you to step foot in this house. You hear me? Not you. Not that fucking Andrew of yours. I will have none of that. My eyes shot to Stella, who also looked at me, her eyebrows raised. Then to Ellie, who was standing motionless, staring at Tony with her lips shaking. Andrew? Andrew, he shouted. Turning around, Tony tried to reach towards her. No, babe, it's not what you think. It's... You fornicated under my roof with another man, Donald screamed at his son. Ellie started sobbing. Oni shook his head and started marching towards the wall, hitting the sleek surface with his fists. Make it stop. Make it stop now. This is not funny. We all stood there watching him pound the wall with his clenched fists for what seemed like an eternity, when suddenly his father got closer, and with a hand that we also saw coming through the surface, as if it was nothing but water, punched Tony right in the face. We all gasped, our minds struggling to grasp what the hell was happening here. I sprinted to him, trying to get him out of reach of his dad, as whatever this was making the blows rain on him, but I could not get him away from that. The strength this thing had, I have never experienced anything like it. I was completely, utterly useless. The hands and arms coming out of the mirror were skinnier than Tony's dad's hands in real life too, as if they had been stretched thin, elongated as they reached to hit and hit again, relentless in their quest for pain. The countdown was getting down to 1 minute now, and we were all shouting for everything to stop, for whatever this was to end. Tony's cries were the loudest. Dad, please stop, stop. I never meant to. I will marry her. I swear it's not what. I'm so sorry, Dad, please. 20 seconds. Please, 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 I'm so sorry. Please, 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 please. 10 seconds. His voice was getting lower now, the numerous hits he had taken leaving him curled into a ball, his body barely moving with the blows. I'm so sorry, Dad. I love him. Ding. With 4 seconds left, the countdown stopped and turned green. Immediately, the hands retracted, the wall went black again, and a door appeared. With a slight creak, it opened. Please move to room number 2. Connor's voice erupted, making all of us jump, except for Tony, who, still curled up on the floor, didn't even seem to notice. Just when you thought it couldn't get any creepier, this next story proves that fear knows no bounds. Phantom Train. The clock on the wall of Rosie's diner ticked steadily, its hands inching closer to the end of another night shift. The small, sleepy town of Pine Hollow was mostly quiet by this hour, its streets empty, and its residents tucked away in their beds. The hum of the refrigerator, the occasional clink of a coffee cup, and the low murmur of the old radio in the corner were the only sounds that kept me company. It was just past 3 a.m., and I was finishing up my nightly routine, wiping down the counters, stacking the chairs, and preparing the diner for the morning crew. I'd worked the night shift at Rosie's for nearly a year, and by now, I was used to the solitude that came with it. Most nights, the silence was comforting, a time for me to collect my thoughts and enjoy the peace that came with the late hours. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, stillness that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I couldn't quite place it. Something was off. As I wiped down the last table, I heard it, a distant, mournful whistle that echoed through the street. I paused, my hand frozen mid-wipe, and listened. The whistle was faint, but it sent a shiver down my spine. It was a sound I had never heard before, not in all my nights working here. I walked over to the window and peered out into the darkness. The street outside was empty, the only light coming from the flickering street lamp on the corner. But as I stood there, listening, the whistle came again, closer this time, louder. It was unmistakably the sound of a train, but there were no tracks near Pine Hollow. The nearest train line was miles away, and it certainly didn't run through the middle of town. Yet, as I strained my ears, I could hear the faint chugging of a steam engine, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks. A sense of unease settled over me. I stepped outside, cool night air hitting my face as I scanned the empty street. The sound of the train grew louder, as if it were approaching, but there was nothing, no tracks, no train, just the empty road and the silent building. And then, as the clock struck 3:15 a.m., I saw it. Ghostly train materialized out of the darkness, its form hazy and indistinct, like a mirage. The train was old, its engine a relic from a bygone era, billowing steam that dissipated into the night. The cars were dimly lit, their windows flickering with an eerie bluish light. I stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the phantom train as it rumbled past the diner. The whistle sounded again, a mournful wail that echoed through the streets, and I felt a strange pull, compulsion to follow the train, to board it. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts, but the pull was strong, almost irresistible. My feet began to move on their own, carrying me toward the train as it slowed to a stop just beyond the diner. The doors of one of the cars creaked open, revealing a dark, shadowy interior. For a moment, I felt a surge of panic, a voice in the back of my mind screaming at me to turn back, to run. But the pull was too strong, compulsion too overwhelming. And then, just as I was about to step forward, the train began to move again. The doors slammed shut, and the engine roared to life, picking up speed as it disappeared into the darkness. The whistle blew one last time, fading into the night as the train vanished from sight. I stood there, trembling, my heart pounding in my chest. The street was silent once more, as if the train had never been there. But I knew what I had seen, and I knew it wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Phantom Train was real, and it had almost claimed me. The next day at Rosie's Diner was a blur. I went through the motions of my shift, serving customers, refilling coffee cups, and taking orders. My mind was elsewhere. The memory of the Phantom Train haunted me, replaying in my mind over and over again. The eerie whistle, the ghostly engine, the overwhelming compulsion to board. It all felt like a nightmare, but I knew it had been real. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on my work, but it was no use. The train had left a mark on me, a lingering sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I found myself glancing at the clock more often, dreading the approach of 3:15 a.m. As the night wore on, I grew more anxious. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see the train again. The streets remained empty. The regular customers trickled out one by one, leaving me alone in the diner as the hour grew late. By the time 3 a.m. rolled around, the diner was silent once more. I busied myself with cleaning, trying to distract myself from the growing dread in the pit of my stomach. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming, something inevitable. The clock on the wall chimed softly, signaling the arrival of 3:15 a.m. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, and listened. At first there was nothing, just the low hum of the diner's lights and the faint buzz of the refrigerator. But then, faint and distant, I heard it, the mournful whistle of the Phantom Train. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The street outside was empty, just as it had been the night before. But the sound of the train grew louder, echoing through the streets, and I felt that same pull, that same compulsion to follow. And then, out of the darkness, the train appeared once more. It materialized in front of the diner, just as it had the previous night, ghostly forms shimmering in the dim light. The whistle blew again, and I felt the pull intensify, drawing me closer to the door. I knew I shouldn't go outside, shouldn't get closer to the train, but the compulsion was too strong. My feet moved on their own, carrying me toward the door. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling, and stepped outside. The train was slowing to a stop, just as it had the night before. The doors of one of the cars creaked open, revealing the dark interior. I took a step forward, pull almost unbearable now, as if some unseen force was dragging me toward the train. But this time, I resisted. I planted my feet firmly on the ground, forcing myself to stay put. The train's whistle wailed again, a desperate, mournful sound that seemed to call to me, but I didn't move. The doors remained open for a moment longer, as if waiting for me to board. And then, with a loud clang, they slammed shut. The engine roared to life, and the train began to move, picking up speed as it disappeared into the darkness once more. I stood there, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The street was silent again, but the pull, the compulsion to follow, still lingered, a nagging feeling in the back of my mind. I knew I couldn't keep resisting the train's call forever. It would return, and each time the pull would be stronger, harder to resist. I needed to find out what the train wanted, why it was appearing to me, and why I felt so drawn to it. I had to uncover the truth before it was too late. The next morning, I decided to ask around town. Pine Hollow was small, and most of the residents knew each other's business. If the phantom train was real, that had been seen before, surely someone would know something. I started with the regulars at the diner, those who had lived in Pine Hollow their whole lives. But when I mentioned the train, they just gave me puzzled looks, shaking their heads as if I was talking nonsense. No one had ever heard of a train passing through town, let alone a ghostly one. Frustrated but undeterred, I decided to visit the local library. The town's history was well documented there, and if the phantom train had any connection to Pine Hollow's past, I was determined to find it. The library was a small, quiet building near the center of town. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly librarian, greeted me with a warm smile as I walked in. She'd known me since I was a kid, and she was always happy to help with whatever I needed. "Good morning, dear," she said, peering at me over her glasses. "What brings you here today?" "I'm looking for information about the town's history," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Specifically, anything about trains or railroads that might have run through here." Mrs. Henderson frowned thoughtfully. "Well, there's never been a train line through Pine Hollow, as far as I know. The nearest tracks are miles away, but I can show you some old records and see if there's anything that might help." She led me to a back room filled with dusty filing cabinets and old books. As she sorted through the files, I glanced around, taking in the musty smell of old paper and the quiet hum of the overhead lights. After a few minutes, Mrs. Henderson handed me a stack of old newspaper clippings and historical documents. "These are from the early 1900s, she said. "There was a lot of development in the area back then, and it's possible there was talk of building a railroad. You might find something useful here." I thanked her and sat down at one of the tables, spreading out the documents in front of me. Most of the articles were about the town's early settlers, local businesses, and the construction of the main roads. But then I found something that caught my eye. A headline from 1912 that read, "Tragedy strikes at Pine Hollow Station." The article described a terrible accident that had occurred during the construction of a small train station on the outskirts of town. The station was part of a new rail line that was supposed to connect Pine Hollow to the larger towns nearby. But before the line could be completed, a train carrying construction workers derailed, killing everyone on board. The project was abandoned after the accident, and the half-built station was left to decay. Over time, the story of the accident faded into local legend, and eventually, the station and the tracks were forgotten. As I read the article, a chill ran down my spine. Could this be connected to the phantom train? Was the train that had appeared to me somehow tied to the tragedy that had occurred over a century ago? I needed to know more. I searched through the rest of the documents, but there was no further mention of the train or the station. It was as if the town had erased the memory of the tragedy, burying it beneath years of forgotten history. But I wasn't about to give up. I decided to visit the site of the old station, hoping to find some clue that would help me understand the train's connection to the past. The site of the old station was on the outskirts of town, hidden away in a thick forest that had grown up around it over the years. I drove as far as I could, then parked my car and continued on foot, following the directions from the article. The forest was dense and overgrown, the path barely visible beneath the tangled underbrush. As I pushed my way through the trees, I felt a growing sense of unease. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and the only sound was the rustling of the wind through the branches. After what felt like an eternity, I finally emerged into a small clearing. There, half buried beneath the undergrowth, were the remnants of the old station. The wooden platform had long since rotted away, and the tracks were rusted and twisted, barely recognizable beneath the moss and vines that had overtaken them. I walked around the clearing, searching for any sign of the train or the accident that had occurred here. But there was nothing, just the silent ruins of a forgotten project, abandoned to time. But then, as I was about to give up, I saw it, a small, weathered plaque, half hidden beneath a pile of leaves. I brushed away the debris and squinted at the faded lettering, in memory of those who lost their lives on this site. May 15th, 1912. Their spirits shall forever ride the rails. A shiver ran down my spine as I read the inscription. The connection was clear. Phantom Train was somehow tied to the spirits of those who had died in the accident, forever bound to the tracks that had claimed their lives. But why had the train appeared to me? Why was I being drawn to it? As I pondered these questions, the air around me seemed to grow colder, and the light began to fade. I glanced at my watch. It was 3 p.m., still hours away from sunset, but the shadows were lengthening, and a thick mist was beginning to rise from the ground, swirling around the trees like ghostly tendrils. The pull I had felt the past 2 nights returned, stronger than ever. It tugged at my chest, urging me to stay, to wait for the train to appear. I could almost hear the whistle, faint and distant, echoing through the trees. But I knew better than to stay. I turned and hurried back the way I had come, fighting against the pull with every step. The mist thickened around me, the trees closing in, but I pushed on, desperate to escape the clearing. Finally, I broke free of the forest and stumbled back to my car, gasping for breath. Pull had lessened, but it was still there, a nagging sensation in the back of my mind, urging me to return. But I knew I couldn't go back. Not yet. I needed to know more, needed to understand what the train wanted from me before I could face it again. I drove back to town, my mind racing with questions. What was the connection between the train and the accident? Why was I being drawn to it? And most importantly, how could I break the pull before it claimed me as its next victim? That night, I returned to Rosie's diner, determined to stay away from the Phantom Train. I had made up my mind to quit the night shift and leave Pine Hollow for good. Whatever the train wanted, I wasn't going to let it take me. But as the clock ticked closer to 3:15 a.m., I felt the pull again, stronger than ever. It was as if the train knew I was trying to escape, and it wasn't going to let me go. The whistle sounded, louder than before, echoing through the diner. I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to resist, but the compulsion was too strong. My feet moved on their own, carrying me to the door. I stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The train was already there, waiting for me, its ghostly form shimmering in the darkness. The doors creaked open, and the pull became unbearable. I knew I couldn't fight it any longer. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the train, my heart pounding in my chest. The mist swirled around me, the air thick with the scent of steam and smoke. As I approached the train, I felt a strange sense of calm. Fear and dread that had plagued me for days seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of inevitability. This was my fate. There was no escaping it. I climbed aboard the train, the door slamming shut behind me. The interior was dark, the only light coming from the flickering lamps that lined the walls. The seats were old and worn, the upholstery torn and faded. But there was no one else on board, just me and the ghostly presence that filled the car. The train began to move, the wheels clattering on the tracks as it picked up speed. I sat down, my hands trembling, and stared out the window. The town of Pine Hollow passed by in a blur, the lights flickering in the distance. And then, as the train sped through the night, the truth hit me. The train wasn't taking me away. It was bringing me back. Back to the moment of the accident. Back to the place where it all began. The mist outside the window thickened, and the train's whistle wailed, a mournful sound that echoed through the darkness. I felt the pull grow stronger, drawing me deeper into the past, into the tragedy that had claimed so many lives. The train hurtled forward, the landscape outside warping and twisting. The world around me faded, replaced by the dark, shadowy figures of the passengers who had died in the accident. They were all there, their faces pale and lifeless, their eyes empty. And then I saw it, the moment of the crash. The train derailed, the cars tumbling off the tracks, the sound of metal screeching against metal filling the air. Passengers screamed, their voices lost in the chaos. And then, silence. The train slowed to a stop, the ghostly passengers fading into the mist. I was alone again, the car empty and silent. Pull was gone, replaced by a deep, overwhelming sadness. The train had brought me here to witness its final moments, to show me the tragedy that had bound it to the tracks for all eternity. And now, it was over. The train began to move again, slowly this time, carrying me back to Pine Hollow. The mist cleared, the town coming back into view. The whistle sounded one last time, a final farewell, as the train came to a stop in front of the diner. The doors creaked open, and I stepped off the train, cold night air hitting my face. Train was gone, the tracks empty once more. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where the train had been. Pull finally gone. Clock on the diner's wall struck 3:30 a.m., and the world around me was silent. Phantom train had claimed its last victim. Its journey was over, its passengers finally at rest, and I too was free. And while one haunting may seem isolated, the echoes of terror resonate in this next tale. His Blood is Enough. Part 1, Among the Lilies series. I never thought I'd work at a funeral home, but after months of sending out resumes and getting no callbacks, you take what you can get. Office assistant needed. Quiet environment. Immediate hire. No salary. No details. I could feel the desperation. It screamed sketchy, but I was burnt out. After hundreds of applications, I needed a job, any job. As long as it wasn't a scam or something worse, I could make it work. Still, I didn't expect to hear back. I applied, not expecting anything to come from it. It had been months since I got fired, and unemployment was running dry. I hadn't told anyone. Not my parents, not my friends. My landlord had been giving me extensions on rent, but I could tell his patience was running thin. I was ashamed, and I couldn't stomach the idea of moving back home. When I arrived at Holloway Funeral Home for my interview, the scent of lilies hit me as soon as I stepped through the door. Thick and overwhelming. My nose wrinkled. I hate lilies, I thought. They smell like the dead. But of course it did. It was a funeral home. If I got the job, I'd better get used to it. Funeral home stood alone, its weathered brick facade blending into the overgrown cemetery beside it. Crooked headstones poked out from the tall grass, leaning awkwardly, slowly sinking into the earth. It was clear no one had come to visit in decades. No flowers, no offerings of memory or respect. Nobody checked on the graves, but that was life. People moved, died, and forgot. The chipped stone walls of the funeral home felt oppressive from the outside, but as I stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. Despite the worn-down interior, peeling wallpaper, faded rugs, and dust clinging to every corner, there was something oddly comforting about it. The dim, flickering lights barely illuminated the space, but the warm glow of mismatched lamps created a sense of familiarity. Felt lived in, like a well-worn sweater, frayed at the edges, still warm and familiar. With a little attention and care, it could easily regain some of its former charm. In the adjacent room, the viewing room held on to that same strange comfort. The pews were dusty but neatly arranged, and the soft glow from small lamps on either side of the room cast a muted warmth. Closed coffin sat at the front, surrounded by lilies, their thick, sickly sweet scent filling the air and making my eyes water. The coffin made me uneasy, but like the lilies, I'd better get used to them fast. Jared Holloway, the funeral director, greeted me at the front desk. He looked to be around 40, his appearance just as worn as the building itself, shirt half-tucked, tie hanging loosely around his neck. Despite his disheveled look, there was a warmth to him, quiet familiarity that mirrored the comforting, lived-in feel of the funeral. His eyes briefly flicked to the coffin I'd been staring at before settling back on me. He smiled, trying to put me at ease. "Don't worry. We don't bite. Well, at least I don't. The ones in the coffins, though, they've been known to get a bit restless." Couldn't help but laugh at that. It was such a dad joke. Jared grinned again. "Sorry, I have a 5- and 3-year-old, said, and you could hear the love for his kids in his voice, softening the darkness of his humor just a little. "And well, you have to have some twisted humor surrounded by this," he gestured towards the viewing room. His eyes grew dark, and he looked even more tired. He shook his head as though banishing whatever thoughts he had. "I'm sorry," he apologized. "I'm exhausted. Along with my 2 monkeys, my wife is pregnant again, and since our old assistant quit, well," trailed off. "Well, come on back to the office, Nina, and we can chat." I followed him to his office, which was a mess. Papers were scattered across the floor and piled high on the desk as though the weight of the funeral home's operations had been hastily dropped. Smell of old paper lingered in the air, adding to the sense of age and neglect. Despite the disarray, personal touches made the space feel lived in. Framed pictures of Jared's family sat on his desk and hung on the walls. There was a photo of a young boy grinning with his front 2 teeth missing, and a little girl with blonde pigtails laughing beside him. Jared was smiling broadly, one arm around his children, and a hand resting lovingly on his wife's round belly. It was beautiful and laughing, eyes closed. "That's Ethan and that's Iris," he said, pointing to the picture. He was beaming. "And that beautiful woman is my wife, Elise." He noticed me looking at the rest of the pictures. "That's my mom. She's a beauty, right?" he said, pointing to the picture of the woman with the kind eyes. "I get it from her, obviously." He chuckled, but his laugh trailed off as his gaze shifted to the picture of him and his father. The change in his mood was instant, a shadow falling over his face. "And that's Dad, Silas," Jared said, voice dropping. His eyes flicked toward the hallway, then back to me. "You'll meet him eventually. He keeps to himself. Spends most of his time in the mortician's room. He was supposed to interview you as well. But..." Jared's voice took on a sharper edge, his smile tightening. He glanced down the hallway again, then back at me, shaking his head slightly. "Guess he had other things to do." As he spoke, faint thud echoed from down the hallway, followed by a distant bang. My head jerked towards the sound, but Jared didn't seem to react. Faint buzzing, like a saw starting up, hummed through the silence. "He prefers the dead?" I offered, trying to lighten the mood. Jared laughed. "Right, yeah. I think you'll be a good fit here, Nina." "Ease," I thought silently, trying not to show my excitement. It was hard. The interview went as expected. Jared asked the usual boring interview questions, such as, "Have you worked in an office before? And how comfortable are you with answering phones?" But some questions were more unique. "How do you feel about being around the deceased?" The question hung in the air, and I swallowed, trying not to think too hard about it. "I think I'll manage," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Can you handle being alone here after hours?" "Alone? Here?" My skin prickled, but I nodded. "Yes, I think so." "What would you do if something in the funeral home made you uncomfortable?" I hesitated. "Depends on what it is, I guess," I said, managing a weak smile. "Are you squeamish at the sight of a body?" "No," I lied, though the thought of an open casket still made my stomach twist. "How would you react to people in extreme distress from grief?" This one gave me pause. "I try to stay calm and help them through it," said, though I could already imagine the weight of other people's grief pressing down on me. The overall functions of the job were simple enough. Answering phones, handling scheduling, filing paperwork. My mouth dropped open when he told me the pay rate. It was way more than I had made at my previous job, and hope fluttered in my stomach. "Does that work for you?" Jared asked, looking down as he adjusted some paperwork. "I know it's not a lot, but you get yearly raises." "Are you serious?" I blurted, unable to stop myself. "That's twice as much as I made at my old job." I clapped my hand over my mouth, cheeks flushing with embarrassment at my outburst. But Jared just chuckled. "Okay, well, you're hired," Jared said, grinning. "You'll fit in just fine, Nina. Well, we are in a bit of a bind right now with Luella just up and quitting. So, let's go. Let me give you a tour of the place." My stomach flipped. This was it. I had the job. Relief. Excitement. But something wasn't right. Everything was moving too fast, too easily. Flicker of doubt crept in, making my skin prickle. I forced a smile, telling myself to shake it off. Don't think about it. Just follow him. Jared led me back to the front and gestured to the reception area. The large mahogany desk was cluttered with paperwork and old files stacked precariously on every surface. "This is where you'll be working most of the time," he said, gesturing toward a small desk by the window. "Go greet people, handle phone calls, schedule paperwork, basic boring admin stuff. Nothing too crazy." I nodded, my eyes scanning the room. It looked as if the woman who worked here had left in a rush. An open tube of lipstick lay abandoned on the desk. A half-empty coffee cup sat forgotten, and a jacket was slung over the back of a chair, as though someone had just stepped out but planned to return any minute. Everything felt unfinished, like whoever had been here left suddenly. "This way," Jared said, guiding me toward another room. As soon as we entered, the heavy scent of lilies hit me again, and I realized this must be the viewing room. The soft glow from the lamps created a muted warmth, and the room, though simple, had an almost comforting feel. "This is the heart of the place," Jared explained, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "You'll sometimes help out here, arranging flowers, making sure the tissues are stocked, keeping things neat." He smiled. "You don't have to worry about the bodies, though. Leave that to us, the professionals. I laughed nervously. The closed coffin at the front of the room caught my eye, sending a small shiver through me. Quickly looked away, not wanting to let my unease show. As we left the viewing room, the floorboards groaned underfoot, and a sudden draft chilled the back of my neck as if something had brushed past me. I whipped my head around but saw nothing, only the soft glow of the lamps and the lingering scent of lilies. My stomach clenched as I tried to shake the feeling of being watched. Jared continued the tour, walking down a narrow hallway lined with dimly lit portraits of solemn faces. "This is the arrangement room," said, opening another door. Inside, an old wooden table sat in the middle, surrounded by chairs. Brochures for caskets and urns were fanned out across the surface. "You probably won't spend too much time here unless I need help organizing stuff or setting things up for families," said, his tone light but distracted, as if his mind was elsewhere. I noticed his eyes flicker toward the corners of the room, almost as if expecting to see someone. "Okay," I muttered, feeling the heavy air pressing in around me. I glanced over my shoulder again, the shadows in the hallway seeming to shift. Just for a moment. Something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on it. We moved on to the storage room, cluttered with supplies, more files, cleaning materials, and stacks of unopened boxes. Jared gestured absently. "This is where we keep any extra supplies. If you ever need anything, it'll be here." I barely listened. The hairs on the back of my neck were still standing on end. I was sure someone had been watching us. Jared's voice broke the eerie silence. "This way," he said, voice dropping slightly lower, guiding me toward another door. "Garage is through here. It's where we keep the hearse. Yeehaw." He chuckled. "Sorry, my kids call the hearse a horse. Another dad joke. Better get used to them." Found myself smiling. Clearly adored his kids. He was a good father. Told him so, and he laughed again, lightly embarrassed. "Yeah, they're my world. I'd do anything for them." We reached another room, larger and dimly lit. Old steel tables and cabinets along the walls. Jared's voice grew quieter, more serious. "This is the prep room. The embalming and everything happens here. You'll never have to come in unless... well, you'll probably never have to come in." He hesitated momentarily, glancing at me before adding, "And that back there is the cremation room." He pointed toward a large, scratched door at the end of the hall, edges darkened from years of wear. "You won't be going in there either," he said, his voice soft, almost reluctant. "But I just want you to know the full layout of the place." I swallowed hard, my eyes darting around the sterile space. A shadow flickered at the edge of my vision, but when I turned my head, it was gone. My chest tightened and a shiver ran down my spine. Jared stared at the door so long that it made me uncomfortable. The seconds dragged on, the silence pressing in like a weight. I shifted on my feet, waiting for him to say something. Just as I opened my mouth, Jared blinked, snapping out of whatever trance had taken hold. Cleared his throat awkwardly. "Okay, that's the end of the tour. Now I can officially welcome you to Hawthorne Funeral. Congratulations," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He turned to me, eyes strangely bright. "So, when can you start?" "Is tomorrow okay?" I asked, trying to keep my excitement in check. "Perfect," Jared said with a grin. "Let's get the paperwork sorted, and I'll train you first thing in the morning. Let's say 7? Before it gets rowdy in here." He chuckled at his joke. My heart skipped a beat. "Yeah, sure, thank you so much," I said, my voice bright with excitement. This was exactly what I needed. Fresh start. But as Jared turned and started walking down the hallway, whistling a low, casual tune, that excitement began to dim like a candle flickering in the wind. The uneasy feeling from earlier crept back in, heavier this time. I followed him, but the sensation of being watched clung to me. The shadows along the hallway felt darker, more alive. Instinctively, I glanced over my shoulder and froze. The door to the embalming room was cracked open. First, it seemed like nothing, just a sliver of darkness. But then my breath caught in my throat. Through the gap, I saw a face. A man with wild white hair tumbling to his shoulders, his pale, lifeless eyes locked onto mine. His expression was completely blank, emotionless, as though there was no thought or feeling behind those dead eyes, just a cold, hollow stare. Silas, the man from the picture in Jared's office, co-owner of the funeral home, Jared's father. I blinked, my heart hammering in my chest, and when I looked again, the door was closed.